As the rain settles into a steady rhythm outside, you've found your way here. Maybe sleep slipped past you tonight. That happens. Some nights feel endless, but you're not alone in them. Stay with me for 5 gentle stories, carried by the sound of rain. There's nothing else you need to do. Story 1. The neighbor who said we've met before. Moving day was chaos, the way moving days always are. Boxes stacked in the wrong rooms, furniture that wouldn't fit through doorways, a couch that had to be disassembled in the stairwell because the elevator was broken and no one had thought to mention that before I signed the lease. By the time I got the last box inside and collapsed onto that reassembled couch, it was nearly 9 p.m., and I was too exhausted to do anything but stare at the ceiling and question every decision that had led me to this moment. The apartment was nice, though. I had to give it that. 3rd floor of a converted brownstone, original hardwood floors, big windows that let in the kind of natural light my last place had never seen. The neighborhood was quiet. One of those residential pockets tucked between busier streets, all old trees and iron fences and people walking dogs at reasonable hours. I'd moved here for a job, a good one, the kind of opportunity you don't turn down, even if it means uprooting your entire life and starting over in a city where you don't know anyone. 28 years old, finally doing something that felt like forward motion instead of just treading water. I met him the next morning. I was hauling trash bags down to the bins in the side alley, cardboard and packing paper, the aftermath of unpacking, when I noticed someone standing at the back door of the ground floor unit. A man, maybe mid-40s, with graying hair and a face that was handsome in a weathered kind of way. He was watching me, not doing anything else, not pretending to check his phone or take out his own trash, just standing there, watching, with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Hi," I said, because what else do you say? "I just moved into 3B. I'm Margot." He smiled. It was a nice smile, warm and genuine, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. But something about it made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. "I know," he said. "We've met before." I laughed, assuming it was a joke I wasn't getting. "I don't think so. I just got into town yesterday. Drove in from Ohio." "No, we've definitely met." He stepped closer, still smiling, and I found myself taking a half step back without meaning to. "You don't remember? That's okay. I remember enough for both of us." The way he said it, casual, certain, like he was stating an obvious fact, made my skin prickle. I tightened my grip on the trash bags. "I think you might have me confused with someone else." "Margot Reeves," he said. 28, moved here from Columbus for a marketing position at Hartwell & Associates. You have a sister named Dana and a cat named Professor Whiskers, although the cat stayed with your ex when you broke up. His smile hadn't wavered. "We've met, Margot. Trust me." I didn't say anything. Couldn't say anything. My throat had closed up, my brain struggling to process how this stranger knew details about my life that I hadn't shared with anyone in this city, details I hadn't even put on social media. "I'm Richard," he continued, like this was a perfectly normal conversation. "Richard Vance, Unit 1A. If you need anything, anything at all, don't hesitate to knock. I'm always home." He turned and went back inside, closing the door gently behind him. I stood in the alley for a long time, trash bags dangling from my hands, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd seen my application. Maybe he was friends with the landlord and had glanced at my paperwork. That would explain my name, my previous city, maybe even my job. It wouldn't explain the cat, though. It wouldn't explain Professor Whiskers, who I'd only mentioned to close friends and who definitely wasn't on any lease application. I threw the trash in the bins and went back upstairs. Locked my door, checked the locks twice, then a third time. Sat on my couch, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and told myself I was overreacting. He was probably just a weird guy. Every building had one. He'd probably looked me up online, found some old post about the cat, pieced together information like people do when they're lonely and curious and have too much time on their hands. Creepy, sure, but not dangerous. Not necessarily. I unpacked for the rest of the day, trying to focus on the mundane tasks of building a new life. Dishes in cabinets, clothes in closets, books on shelves I'd assembled with more swearing than the instructions suggested was necessary. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself the encounter in the alley had been a fluke, a one-time weirdness I'd laugh about later. Then I found the note. It was slipped under my door sometime between dinner and bedtime. I hadn't heard anyone in the hallway, hadn't heard footsteps or a knock or any sound at all. Just a folded piece of paper on my hardwood floor, close enough to the door that I nearly stepped on it in the dark. I picked it up with hands that had started to tremble. Margot, so glad you finally found your way here. I've been waiting a long time. Let's catch up soon. R. Finally found your way here. Like he'd known I was coming. Like he'd been expecting me. I read the note 3 times, then crumpled it and threw it in the trash. Then I fished it out again and smoothed it flat, because evidence, because proof that this was happening, that I wasn't imagining the wrongness that had settled into my chest like a stone. I barely slept that night, lay in bed watching the strip of light under my door, waiting for shadows to pass, waiting for another note to appear. Nothing happened. The building was silent, the kind of deep nighttime quiet that should have been peaceful, but instead felt like something holding its breath. In the morning, I told myself I'd confront him, ask him directly how he knew so much about me, demand an explanation, set boundaries the way all the self-help books said you were supposed to. I was a grown woman. I didn't have to be afraid of some nosy neighbor with boundary issues. I went downstairs, knocked on the door of 1A, and waited. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I was about to give up when the door across the hall opened and an elderly woman peered out. White hair, thick glasses, the kind of housecoat my grandmother used to wear. You looking for someone, dear? My neighbor, Richard Vance. He lives in this unit. The woman's face did something complicated. Confusion, then concern, then something that looked almost like fear. Honey, she said slowly, that apartment's been empty for 6 years, ever since Richard passed away. I must have looked as shaken as I felt, because the woman, Mrs. Bellamy, she introduced herself, insisted I come in for tea. Her apartment was cluttered with decades of accumulated living, every surface covered with framed photographs and ceramic figurines and stacks of magazines she probably meant to recycle. She settled me into an overstuffed armchair and pressed a cup of chamomile into my hands, watching me with the careful concern of someone who'd seen her share of strange things. Tell me what happened, she said. So I did. The encounter in the alley, the things he knew about me, the note under my door. Mrs. Bellamy listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. That does sound like Richard, she said when I finished. He was always observant, noticed things about people, made some folks uncomfortable, the way he'd remember details you'd only mentioned once, months before. She paused, stirring her tea. He wasn't a bad man, just lonely, I think, kept to himself mostly. Then one day about 6 years ago, they found him in his apartment. Heart attack, the coroner said. He'd been dead for almost a week before anyone noticed. A week. He'd been dead in that apartment for a week, and no one had known. Are you sure it's been empty since then? I asked. Maybe someone moved in recently. Someone who looks like him. Or... Dear, I've lived in this building for 32 years. I know every tenant who's come and gone. That apartment has been vacant since Richard died. The landlord can't seem to rent it. People tour it, but no one ever signs. They always change their minds at the last minute. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. You're sure it was 1A? You're sure he said Richard Vance? I was sure. I was absolutely sure. And that certainty was starting to feel less like solid ground and more like a trapdoor waiting to open. I thanked Mrs. Bellamy for the tea and went back upstairs, my mind churning through possibilities. A prank, maybe. Someone pretending to be the dead former tenant to mess with the new girl. Except who would do that? And how would they know about Professor Whiskers? The note was still on my kitchen counter where I'd left it. I picked it up and looked at it again, at the neat handwriting, the casual familiarity of the words. I've been waiting a long time. How long? 6 years? Longer? I spent the rest of the day trying to learn everything I could about Richard Vance. It wasn't easy. He died before social media was as ubiquitous as it is now, and his digital footprint was minimal. I found an obituary in the local paper's archive. Richard Allen Vance, 52, no surviving family, worked as an archivist at the city's historical society. A quiet man who preferred books to people, the obituary said. He will be missed by his neighbors and colleagues. There was a photo, grainy, black and white, clearly scanned from a print original, but it was him. The man from the alley, the man who'd smiled at me and recited details of my life like he'd memorized them from a file. Same face, same graying hair, same eyes that looked warm on the surface but held something else underneath. I stared at that photo for a long time. An archivist, someone whose job was to collect and preserve information, to notice details, to remember things that other people forgot. It made a horrible kind of sense. That night, I dreamed about him. We were sitting in a room I didn't recognize, old-fashioned, dusty, filled with filing cabinets that stretched up toward a ceiling I couldn't see. Richard was across from me, that same warm smile on his face, a folder open in his lap. "You're earlier than I expected," he said. "I had you down for next spring, but that's all right. I'm adaptable." "I don't understand," I said, and in the dream my voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking through me. "How do you know me? We've never met." "Of course we have." He flipped through the folder, and I caught glimpses of photographs. Me as a child, me at my college graduation, me crying in my car the day I signed the divorce papers for my first marriage, one I'd never actually had. "I've known you your whole life, Margot, every version of it." I woke up gasping, tangled in sheets, damp with sweat. The clock read 3:47 a.m., and for a moment I was sure someone was standing in the corner of my room, watching. I fumbled for the lamp, flooded the space with light, and found nothing. Just shadows and boxes and the ordinary detritus of an ordinary move. But on my nightstand, where I was certain nothing had been before, was a photograph. Me, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize, wearing a dress I didn't remember owning. The colors were faded, the edges worn, like it had been handled many times over many years. I was smiling at the camera with the uncomplicated joy of a child who doesn't yet know there are things to be afraid of. I turned it over. On the back, in handwriting I now recognized, "The first time. You were so young. I've been watching ever since." I didn't scream. I wanted to, but the sound caught in my throat and stayed there, a knot of terror I couldn't swallow. I dropped the photograph like it had burned me and backed away from the nightstand, from my bed, from everything in that room that had felt safe an hour ago. Someone had been in my apartment, while I slept, had stood close enough to leave a photograph on my nightstand, close enough to watch me dream about filing cabinets and folders with my life inside them. The first time. What did that mean? The first time he'd seen me. The first time in some cycle I didn't understand. I grabbed my phone and called the only person I could think of. Dana, my sister, 3 time zones away and probably asleep. She answered on the 4th ring, voice thick with confusion. "Margot, it's like 1 a.m. here. What's wrong?" "I need you to look something up for me." I was pacing now, unable to stay still. "That house we lived in when we were kids, before Dad got transferred. Do you remember the address?" "The one in Pennsylvania?" "Margot, what is this about?" "Just, please, do you remember?" A long pause. I heard her moving around, probably reaching for her laptop. "I think Mom might have mentioned it once. Why does this matter at 1 a.m.? Do you remember any of the neighbors? Anyone named Richard?" Another pause, longer this time. When Dana spoke again, her voice was strange, careful. "Margot, that's really weird that you're asking that." "Why?" "Because there was a guy named Richard who lived on that street. Mom used to complain about him, said he was always watching us play in the yard, that he made her uncomfortable. She was so relieved when we moved." Dana's voice had gone quiet. She said she caught him taking pictures once, pictures of us, of you, specifically. Dad wanted to call the police, but we were moving anyway, so they just let it go. The room tilted. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, the photograph face down on the floor where I'd dropped it, and tried to remember how to breathe. "Margot, you're scaring me. What's going on?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't explain that the man who'd watched me as a child, who'd photographed me through our yard fence 20 years ago, was somehow living in the apartment below mine. Except he wasn't living. He'd been dead for 6 years, and he'd said he'd been waiting for me. I didn't stay in the apartment that night. Grabbed my purse, my keys, my phone, and drove to a hotel 15 minutes away. Checked in under a fake name, paid cash, and sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like industrial cleaner, trying to figure out what the hell was happening to me. The rational explanations had run out. A dead man had spoken to me, touched a note that I'd held in my hands, left a photograph on my nightstand while I slept. Either I was having a complete psychological break, or something was happening that didn't fit into any framework I understood. I called in sick to work the next day, spent the morning on my laptop, digging deeper into Richard Vance's history, looking for anything that might explain the connection between us. What I found made me wish I'd never started looking. Richard had lived in Pennsylvania before moving here. The same town, the same street, the same years that my family had lived there. Property records confirmed it. He'd owned a house 3 doors down from ours, had sold it the same year we moved away. He'd followed us. Not immediately, not obviously, but within a few years, he'd ended up in this city. The same city my job offer had come from. The same city I'd chosen for my fresh start. Except I hadn't chosen it. The job had found me, a recruiter reaching out on LinkedIn, an opportunity too good to pass up. I'd felt so lucky at the time, so fortunate that the universe was finally throwing something good my way. Now I wondered if the universe had nothing to do with it. I dug further. Found employment records showing Richard had worked at the Historical Society for 15 years before his death. Found his address history, 3 different apartments in this city, the last one being 1A in my building. Found a police report from 8 years ago, a restraining order filed by a woman whose name I didn't recognize. The details were sparse, but the words that stood out made my stomach turn. Surveillance. Unwanted contact. Claims to have known the complainant since childhood. He'd done this before. Found someone, convinced himself he knew them, inserted himself into their life. The woman had gotten a restraining order and moved away. I wondered if she'd ever felt safe again. I checked out of the hotel that afternoon. I know how that sounds. Stupid, reckless, the kind of decision that gets people killed in horror movies. But I couldn't afford to stay away forever. My whole life was in that apartment. My job was in this city. I couldn't let a dead man chase me out of everything I'd worked for. Besides, I had a plan, a stupid plan maybe, but a plan. I stopped at a hardware store on the way home and bought new locks, deadbolts, chain locks, a security bar for the sliding door I didn't have but bought anyway out of paranoia. I bought a camera too, a cheap wireless thing I could monitor from my phone. If something was getting into my apartment, I wanted to see it. I wanted proof. Mrs. Bellamy was in the hallway when I got back, taking out her recycling. She looked at the hardware store bags in my hands, and her face creased with worry. "You're staying," she said. Not a question. "I don't have anywhere else to go." She nodded slowly, like she understood. "Be careful, dear." Richard was persistent. Even before he died, he had a way of fixating on people. I don't think death changed that about him. I wanted to ask her more, how she knew, what she'd seen, whether she'd ever felt him watching her too. But something in her expression told me she'd already said more than she was comfortable with. I thanked her and went upstairs. The apartment felt different when I opened the door. Nothing I could point to, nothing obviously wrong, just a sense that the air had been disturbed, that someone had been there, breathing my air, touching my things. I walked through every room, checking closets and corners, looking for anything out of place. I found it in the bedroom. The photograph I'd dropped was back on my nightstand, propped up against the lamp, facing the bed, positioned so that my childhood face would be the first thing I saw when I woke up. And next to it, arranged in a neat row, were 3 more photographs. Me at 16, walking home from school, taken from across the street. Me at 22, crying outside a coffee shop the day my college boyfriend broke up with me. Me 3 weeks ago, standing in my old apartment in Ohio, visible through the window as I packed boxes for the move. 3 weeks ago. He'd been watching me 3 weeks ago in Ohio, 1,000 miles from this building where he'd supposedly been dead for 6 years. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, but I managed to pull up the camera app and check the feed. I'd set it up that morning, pointed at the front door, motion activated. If anyone had come in, it should have recorded them. The footage showed nothing. 8 hours of empty apartment, my front door never opening, no one entering or leaving. The photographs had appeared on my nightstand without anyone visible putting them there. I was still staring at the screen when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, coming from the apartment below. From 1A. From the unit that had been empty for 6 years. They crossed the floor, paused, then started up the stairs. 1 step at a time, unhurried, patient. The same way Richard had smiled at me in the alley, warm on the surface, something else underneath. I backed away from the door, grabbed the baseball bat I'd bought at the same hardware store, the one purchase I hadn't told myself was overkill. The footsteps reached my floor, stopped outside my door. A knock. Gentle, polite. The kind of knock a friendly neighbor might give. Margot? His voice, muffled by the door but unmistakable. I know you're home. I saw you come in. I didn't answer, gripped the bat tighter, my knuckles white. I'm not going to hurt you. He sounded almost hurt by the implication. I would never hurt you. I've spent so long making sure you'd end up here, in this building, close to me. Why would I ruin that now? Making sure. He'd made sure. The job, the recruiter, the opportunity too good to pass up. He'd arranged it. Somehow, impossibly, a dead man had reached out from wherever he was and manipulated the trajectory of my life. We have so much to talk about, Richard continued. So many years to catch up on. I've watched you grow up, Margot. Watched you make mistakes and learn from them. Watched you become the woman you are. And now you're finally here, and we can be together properly. The doorknob rattled, testing the lock. Open the door, Margot. Let me in. It's cold out here in the hallway. A soft laugh. It's always cold where I am, but you can fix that. You can make it warm again. The lock held. The new deadbolt, the chain, they held. For now. That's all right, Richard said, his voice still gentle, still patient. I've waited 20 years. I can wait a little longer. But Margot, a pause. Don't try to leave. This building is mine now. Has been since I died, and you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The footsteps retreated. Back down the stairs, back to 1A, back to whatever existence Richard Vance had carved out for himself in the space between life and death. I stood in my apartment with a baseball bat in my hands and realized I was trapped. Not by locks or walls, but by something much worse. By a man who'd been planning this for longer than I'd been alive, who'd shaped my life from the shadows, nudged me toward this moment, this building, this cage he'd built specifically for me, and who had all the time in the world to wait for me to open the door. I tried to leave. Of course I tried. I wasn't going to just accept that I was trapped in a building with the ghost of a man who'd been stalking me since childhood. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and headed for the stairs with every intention of walking out the front door and never looking back. The stairs didn't go anywhere. I descended 3 flights, the same 3 flights I'd climbed dozens of times since moving in. But when I reached the bottom, I wasn't in the lobby. I was on my floor again, standing in front of my own apartment door, my bag still on my shoulder and my keys still in my hand. I tried again and again. Each time, the stairs looped back, deposited me exactly where I'd started. The elevator was the same. I pressed the button for the lobby, watched the doors close, felt the car descend, and when they opened again, I was looking at my own hallway. The building wouldn't let me leave. I pounded on Mrs. Bellamy's door, desperate for help, for confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. No answer. I tried every unit on every floor, knocked until my knuckles ached. Either no one was home, or no one could hear me. The building had become a sealed box with me inside it. Around midnight, I gave up and went back to my apartment. Sat on the couch with the bat across my lap and waited for something to happen. The photograph of my childhood self watched me from the nightstand, that innocent smile now feeling like a taunt. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke to the sound of someone in my kitchen. Not loud sounds, quiet ones. The soft clink of dishes, the gentle rush of water from the tap, the domestic noises of someone making themselves at home. I sat up slowly, my hand finding the bat, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Richard was standing at my counter, his back to me, making tea. "I hope you don't mind," he said without turning around. I let myself in. I have keys to every unit, of course, have since I became part of the building. "Get out." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Get out of my apartment. Our apartment, really. Or it will be." He turned, holding 2 cups, that warm smile still in place. "I've been waiting so long for this, Margot. You can't imagine what it's been like, watching you from a distance, never able to touch, never able to talk, just observing, documenting, keeping track of every moment of your life." "Why me?" I demanded. "Out of everyone in the world, why me?" He set the cups on the coffee table and sat down in the armchair across from me, crossing his legs like we were old friends having a chat. Up close, I could see that he wasn't quite solid. The edges of him blurred slightly, like a photograph that hadn't quite developed right. "Because you saw me," he said. "That day in Pennsylvania, when you were 7 years old. You looked out your window and you saw me standing in my yard, and you waved. Do you remember?" I didn't. Couldn't dredge up any memory of waving at a neighbor, of acknowledging a stranger across the fence. But something about the way he said it made me believe him. "No one ever saw me," Richard continued. "My whole life, I was invisible, background noise. People looked right through me like I wasn't there. But you saw me, Margot. You waved at me like I mattered, like I existed." His smile flickered, something darker surfacing beneath it. "I couldn't let that go. Couldn't let you go. So I watched. I documented. I made sure I knew everything about you, every detail, every moment. And when I died, when I felt myself starting to fade, I held on to that. Held on to you. You became my anchor to this world." "I was 7, I whispered. "I was a child. You were perfect." He leaned forward, and I could smell him now. Dust and old paper and something underneath that was cold and wrong. "And now you're here, finally here, in my building, where I can watch you properly, where we can be together." "I don't want to be together. I don't want anything to do with you. That doesn't matter." His voice was still gentle, but the warmth had drained out of it. "You're my anchor, Margot. Without you, I fade. Without you, I'm nothing. You don't get to leave. You don't get to choose." He reached for me. I swung the bat. It connected with something, Not solid flesh, but not empty air either. More like hitting a thick curtain, a resistance that gave way too easily. Richard flickered, his form stuttering like a video glitch, and for a moment I saw what he really looked like beneath the pleasant exterior. Gray skin stretched over two sharp bones, eyes that were just empty sockets, a mouth that opened too wide, full of darkness instead of teeth. Then he was back, smiling, unharmed. "That wasn't very nice," he said. "After everything I've done for you. The job, I arranged that. Called in favors from the other side. Found someone who owed me. Made sure the recruiter reached out to you specifically. The apartment. I kept it empty for years, turned away every applicant, waited for you to come looking. Everything has been for you, Margot. Every single thing. You're insane. I'm dead. There's a difference." He stood, and the room seemed to get darker, the edges of my vision blurring. "I'm going to give you time to adjust. That's the kind of person I am. Patient, considerate, willing to wait. But understand this. You can't leave. You can't escape. This building is me now, and you're inside me, and that's how it's going to stay." He walked toward the door, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. "I've waited 20 years for this. I can wait a little longer for you to accept it. But don't make me wait too long, Margot. Even patience has limits." He walked through the door, not opened it, walked through it, his body passing through the solid wood like it wasn't there. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, descending to 1A, and then silence. I sat there until morning, the bat in my lap, the tea growing cold on the coffee table. When the sun finally came up, I went to the window and looked out at the city below. Cars moved on the streets. People walked on the sidewalks. The world was right there, just beyond the glass, completely normal and completely unreachable. I tried my phone. The calls wouldn't connect. Just static, then silence, then nothing. I tried the internet, but every page loaded blank. The building had cut me off from everything. Not completely, though. Around noon, a single text message came through. From Dana. "Hey." Tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. "Everything okay? You seemed weird the other night." I typed a response, told her everything. Richard, the photographs, the building that wouldn't let me leave. Watched the message send, watched the little check mark appear indicating it had been delivered. A minute later, another text from Dana. "Margot, what are you talking about? You've been at that apartment for a week, and everything seemed fine when we talked yesterday. Did something happen?" We hadn't talked yesterday. I hadn't talked to anyone in 2 days. I looked at my phone's call history. There were calls there I didn't remember making. Conversations with Dana, with my boss, with a friend from Ohio. All dated within the last 48 hours, all lasting several minutes. Richard was answering for me, using my phone, my voice, maintaining the illusion that everything was normal, making sure no one would come looking, no one would suspect. I was disappearing, and the world wouldn't even notice. Just like Richard had been invisible his whole life, just like no one had ever seen him, until a 7-year-old girl waved at him through a window and sealed both their fates. 3 days passed, maybe 4. Time moved strangely in the building, hours stretching and compressing in ways that didn't match the clocks. Richard visited every night, sitting in my armchair, talking at me about my life like he'd been there for all of it, which, in his way, he had. He showed me more photographs, hundreds of them pulled from folders he seemed to materialize from thin air. Every moment I thought had been private, crying in my car, dancing alone in my kitchen, lying awake at 3 a.m. staring at my ceiling. He had documented all of it. He spoke about my memories like they belonged to him, like my life was a story he'd written and I was just the character acting it out. I stopped responding, stopped reacting, just sat there, staring at nothing, waiting for him to leave. It seemed to frustrate him, this silence. He'd grown so used to me acknowledging him, and now I was taking it away. "You're being childish," he said on the 3rd night. Or the 4th. "I've given you everything. I've made your life possible. The least you could do is show some gratitude." I didn't answer, kept my eyes fixed on a spot on the wall, refusing to look at him. He flickered, just for a moment, that glitch I'd seen when I'd hit him with the bat, his form stuttering like a bad signal. When he stabilized, he looked less solid than before, thinner, more translucent. "Look at me, Margot." I didn't. "Look at me." His voice cracked on the last word, something desperate bleeding through the calm. I kept staring at the wall, and out of the corner of my eye I saw him flicker again. Fade, his edges blurring like watercolors in rain. He needed me to see him. That's what he'd said. I was his anchor, the one person who'd acknowledged his existence. Without that acknowledgement, without my attention, he started to fade. All those years of watching me from a distance hadn't been enough. He needed me to look back, needed me to confirm that he was real. So I stopped looking. It wasn't easy. Every instinct screamed at me to check, to glance, to make sure he wasn't getting closer. But I forced myself to keep my eyes down, my gaze fixed on floors and walls and my own hands. When he appeared in my apartment, I walked past him like he wasn't there. When he spoke, I didn't respond. When he reached for me, I flinched away without making eye contact. I became the person everyone else had always been around him. Someone who looked right through him like he didn't exist. It took 5 days, maybe 6. Time still wasn't working right, but the effects were clear. Richard grew fainter with each visit. His voice became distant, like someone calling from the end of a long tunnel. The photographs stopped appearing. The building started to feel less like a trap and more like an ordinary building. The stairs went where they were supposed to. The elevator reached the lobby. My phone connected to the outside world. On the last day, I finally looked at him. I didn't mean to. He was standing in my doorway when I opened it, more shadow than substance, barely visible against the morning light. My eyes found his face before I could stop them. He smiled. That same warm smile from the first day, except now I could see through it. See the wall behind him through his fading form. "You're clever," he whispered. The words barely reached me. I should have known. You were always so clever, even as a child. "Go away, Richard." "I can't. I'm not. There's nowhere for me to go. You were the only thing holding me here." He flickered, badly, his image breaking apart like static. "But you were also the only thing that made being here bearable, the only thing that made any of it worth it." For a moment, just a moment, I felt something like pity. He'd been invisible his whole life, desperate for connection, and when a 7-year-old girl had given him the smallest acknowledgement, he'd latched onto it like a drowning man grabbing a rope. Everything he'd done, all the watching and documenting and manipulating, it had come from loneliness so profound it had survived his own death. Then I remembered the photographs, the restraining order, the years of my life he'd stolen, the trajectory he'd shaped, the cage he'd built around me because he couldn't stand to be alone. "I don't care," I said. "I don't care that you were lonely. I don't care that no one saw you. You didn't have the right to do this to me. You didn't have the right to make me your anchor without my consent. I know." He was almost gone now, just a suggestion of a shape against the light. I know I didn't. But I did it anyway, and I can't take it back. I can't. His voice faded to nothing, then so faint I almost missed it. "I'm sorry." He disappeared. Not dramatically, not with any kind of effect. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. Just gone, like he'd finally finished fading. I stood in the doorway for a long time, waiting for something else to happen. It didn't. The building was quiet, the hallway was empty, and when I walked downstairs to the lobby, the front door opened like it always should have. I moved out that day, didn't pack, didn't sort through what to take, just left everything and drove until I ran out of gas, then filled the tank and kept driving. Ended up at Dana's place 3 states away, and when she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions, just pulled me inside and held me while I cried. That was 8 months ago. I'm better now. Not okay. I don't know if I'll ever be okay, but better. I have a new apartment in a new city, ground floor this time because I can't handle stairs anymore. I have a new job, one I found myself, one I verified wasn't connected to any mysterious recruiters or too good opportunities. I have a therapist who doesn't believe a word of my story but helps me process it anyway. The nightmares are getting less frequent. I only check over my shoulder a dozen times a day instead of 100. I've started to believe, tentatively, that Richard is really gone. That my refusal to see him finally did what his death couldn't and erased him from the world entirely. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder. I wonder if he's really gone or just faded too far to reach me. I wonder if somewhere, in some in-between space I can't perceive, he's still watching, still documenting, still waiting for me to look up and acknowledge him again. I wonder if I'll ever be able to look at a stranger without fear, if I'll ever wave at a neighbor or smile at someone on the street without thinking about what that acknowledgement might cost me. Richard taught me that being seen is a gift, and gifts create obligations. Some people will take that gift and twist it into chains, will use your kindness as an anchor, your attention as a cage. I don't wave at strangers anymore, don't make eye contact on the subway, don't smile at people in grocery store lines, don't do any of the small social courtesies that used to come naturally. My therapist says this is something we need to work on. She says I can't go through life refusing to connect with people. But she didn't meet Richard. She didn't feel what it was like to be someone's anchor, someone's obsession, someone's reason for existing. She doesn't understand that some connections aren't gifts at all. They're traps that don't spring until it's too late to escape. I check the locks on my door 3 times before bed. I keep my curtains closed. And every morning when I leave my apartment, I look both ways down the hall before stepping out. Not for cars, for neighbors, for someone standing too still, watching too carefully, smiling in a way that's warm on the surface but holds something else underneath. We've met before, he said that first day. He was right. We had met, a 7-year-old waving through a window, a lonely man finally feeling seen. One moment, 20 years ago, that I don't even remember. And it almost cost me everything. If someone ever says those words to you, we've met before, and you don't remember meeting them, trust that instinct. Trust the wrongness you feel in your gut, and whatever you do, don't look too closely. Some people don't want to be seen, they want to be anchored, and once they've got you, they never let go. Story 2. My email drafts filled themselves overnight. I noticed because of the number. My email drafts folder usually had 3 or 4 messages in it, half-written replies I'd abandoned, notes to myself I'd never sent, the occasional template I kept for work. That morning, when I opened my laptop to check messages before my shift, the folder showed 47. I stared at the number for a long moment, certain I was misreading it. 47 drafts. I hadn't written 47 drafts in my entire life, let alone overnight while I was sleeping. I clicked the folder, expecting some kind of glitch, a display error that would resolve itself once the page loaded properly. The drafts were real. 47 emails, all composed between 2:14 and 4:58 a.m., all addressed to people I knew, family members, co-workers, old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had a subject line and a full body of text, written in a style that looked like mine but felt slightly off, like someone had studied how I communicated and was doing a very good impression. I opened the first one. It was addressed to my mother. Mom, I know you're disappointed in how things turned out. You wanted me to be a doctor like Dad, and instead I'm 31 years old working at a call center and living in an apartment with a leak in the ceiling that maintenance won't fix. I know you tell your friends I'm finding myself because you're embarrassed to say what I actually do. I don't blame you. I'm embarrassed too. But I need you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying every day, even when it doesn't look like it. Even when I can't get out of bed until noon. Even when the thought of another shift makes me want to disappear. I'm still here. That has to count for something. Nadia. My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading. I hadn't written this. I knew I hadn't written this. I'd gone to bed at 11, taken my medication, slept through until my alarm at 7. But the words were mine. The thoughts were mine. Things I'd never said to my mother. Things I'd barely admitted to myself, laid out in brutal honesty like someone had reached into my head and transcribed my worst fears. I opened another draft. This one was to my co-worker Marcus. Marcus, I know you think I'm cold. I see the way you look at me when I don't laugh at your jokes or come to happy hour with the rest of the team. But the truth is, I like you. I like you more than I should, more than is appropriate for someone I work with. I don't come to happy hour because I'm afraid of what I might say after a drink or two. I don't laugh at your jokes because if I let myself relax around you, I'll want more than you're offering. It's easier to be cold, easier to keep distance. I'm sorry if that hurts you. It hurts me too. N. I closed the laptop, opened it again. The drafts were still there. For the next hour, I read through every single one. Emails to my sister confessing jealousy over her seemingly perfect life. Emails to my ex-boyfriend detailing exactly why I'd sabotaged our relationship. Emails to my landlord threatening legal action over the leak, written in language far more aggressive than anything I'd ever actually send. Emails to my therapist admitting things I'd never said out loud in our sessions. Each one was true. That was the worst part. Every confession, every secret, every buried resentment, all of it was accurate. Someone, something, had accessed the parts of me I kept hidden and put them into words. The kind of words I'd think at 3 a.m. and then bury by morning, pretend I'd never thought at all. My first instinct was hacking. Someone had gotten into my account, found personal information, crafted these emails to mess with me. But that didn't make sense. How would a hacker know about my feelings for Marcus? How would they know about the fight I'd had with my sister when I was 19, the one we'd never discussed with anyone? How would they know about the medication, the ceiling leak, the specific flavor of disappointment in my mother's voice when she introduced me to her friends? I changed my password. Then I changed it again, something completely random. Letters and numbers and symbols that I wrote down on a piece of paper because I'd never remember it otherwise. I enabled two-factor authentication. I checked my login history. Nothing unusual, no unrecognized devices, no access from strange locations. According to Google, the only person who'd logged into my account was me. The drafts had been written from my account on my device during hours when I was definitely asleep. I deleted them, all 47, one by one, watching each confession disappear into the trash. Then I emptied the trash, just to be sure. The folder showed 0 drafts. The number felt like a small victory, even though I knew it didn't explain anything. I went to work, got through my shift on autopilot, answering calls I barely heard, solving problems I wouldn't remember by the time I clocked out. Marcus said hi to me in the break room and I flinched, thinking about the draft, the words I hadn't written but that were true anyway. He gave me a strange look, and I mumbled something about not sleeping well and escaped before he could ask questions. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, at the water stain from the leak that was slowly spreading, and thought about all the things I'd never said, all the truths I kept buried, the confessions I swallowed, the honesty I couldn't afford. Someone had found those things. Someone had dragged them into the light. I finally drifted off around 2 a.m., exhaustion winning out over fear. When I woke up, there were 63 drafts in my folder. This time, they weren't addressed to people I knew. They were addressed to me. The first one had no subject line. I opened it with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Nadia, we need to talk about what's going to happen. You've been ignoring me for so long, pretending I don't exist, but I'm tired of being quiet. I'm tired of watching you waste our life. Things are going to change now. I'm going to make sure of it. The first step is honesty. You've seen what I can do. You've seen that I know everything you hide. Now it's time for you to start listening. Check your sent folder. N. I didn't want to check. Every instinct told me not to, told me to close the laptop and throw it in the trash and never look at email again. I checked anyway. The sent folder showed 12 new messages, delivered between 3:17 and 4:42 a.m. The email to my mother had been sent. The one to Marcus. The one to my ex-boyfriend, my sister, my therapist. Every secret I'd kept, every truth I'd buried, all of it, out in the world now. Sent from my account while I slept. And at the bottom of each one, a signature I hadn't written. It's time she stopped hiding. You deserve to know who she really is. The fallout started within hours. My mother called first, around 8 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was quiet, careful, the tone she used when she was trying very hard not to cry. Nadia, honey, I got your email. I didn't know you felt that way. Can you please call me back? I think we need to talk. My sister texted 20 minutes later. Less careful, more direct. What the hell was that email? Are you having some kind of breakdown? Call me immediately. Marcus didn't text or call. He just looked at me when I walked into the office, this expression of confusion and something else, hope, maybe, or embarrassment. And I couldn't meet his eyes. I mumbled something about my account being hacked and practically ran to my desk. He didn't follow, didn't bring it up. But I could feel him watching me all morning, that awareness prickling at the back of my neck like a sunburn. I spent my lunch break trying to do damage control, sent a mass email to everyone in my contacts explaining that my account had been compromised, that I hadn't written any of those messages, that I was working with tech support to resolve the issue. Some people responded with understanding. My mother sent back a careful acknowledgement that still managed to convey how much the words had hurt. My ex-boyfriend replied with 2 sentences. Hacked or not, you clearly wrote those things. Don't contact me again. But the worst response came from my therapist. Dr. Chen called my cell directly, something she'd never done outside of emergencies. Nadia, I received a very concerning email from you last night. I need to know if you're safe. I didn't write it. My voice was shaking. My account was hacked. Someone wrote those things, pretending to be me. The email mentioned suicidal ideation. It mentioned specific plans. If you're in crisis. I'm not. I didn't write it. I don't have any plans. I'm not. I stopped, realizing I hadn't read that particular draft, hadn't seen what the thing pretending to be me had told my therapist. What did it say exactly? A long pause. When Dr. Chen spoke again, her voice was careful. It described feeling like a burden. It described wishing you could disappear. It mentioned the medication you take and calculated how many pills it would take to... Stop. Please, stop. I was crying now, tears running down my face in the middle of the office break room. I didn't write that. I would never... I'm not in that place. I'm not. I believe you, Dr. Chen said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure. But I think we need to schedule an emergency session, today, if possible. Can you come in after work? I agreed, because what else could I do? Hung up and sat in the break room until my tears dried, until I could paste on something resembling a normal expression and get through the rest of my shift. That night, I didn't go home. I went to Dr. Chen's office, sat in the familiar chair with the too firm cushion, and tried to explain what was happening. You're saying someone has access to your private thoughts, she said after I'd finished. Thoughts you've never expressed to anyone. Yes. And this person, or entity, is sending emails while you sleep. Emails that reveal information only you would know. I know how it sounds. How do you think it sounds, Nadia? I looked at her, at the careful neutrality in her expression, and realized she thought I was having a psychotic break. Dissociative episodes, maybe. Creating alternate personas that acted out while I slept, expressing the things my waking self couldn't admit. I'm not crazy, I said. I know the difference between things I've done and things that were done to me. I didn't write those emails. The email I received mentioned specific details about our sessions, things you've told me in confidence. How would an outside hacker know those things? She had a point. A hacker could have scraped personal information from social media, made educated guesses about family dynamics, even figured out my feelings for Marcus through observation. But the content of my therapy sessions, that was in my head and nowhere else. Dr. Chen kept paper notes. There was no digital record to steal. I don't know, I admitted. I don't understand how any of this is possible. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen against her notepad. I want to try something. I'd like you to stay awake tonight. All night if you can. Monitor your computer, watch your email. If these messages are being written while you sleep, staying awake should prevent them. It was so obvious I felt stupid for not thinking of it myself. If I didn't sleep, nothing could happen while I was unconscious. Whatever was doing this needed me to be unaware, needed the gap in my attention to work. I went home feeling almost hopeful. Made a pot of coffee, positioned my laptop on the kitchen table where I could watch it, and settled in for an all-nighter. The drafts folder stayed empty. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3. Nothing happened. I started to relax. Maybe Dr. Chen was right. Maybe this was some dissociative phenomenon, and staying conscious would be enough to stop it. At 3:47 a.m., my laptop screen flickered. I was staring right at it, hadn't looked away, hadn't blinked, hadn't done anything except watch, but the screen flickered like a bad signal, went dark for half a second, and when it came back, the drafts folder showed a new message. I opened it with fingers that felt numb. Nadia, you think staying awake will stop me? I'm not in your sleep. I'm not in your dreams. I'm in the spaces between your thoughts, the moments between heartbeats, the gaps in your attention you don't even know exist. I've always been here. You just didn't notice until I wanted you to. N. I slammed the laptop closed. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in short gasps, every instinct screaming that something was wrong, something was here, something was... The apartment was silent. Empty. Just me and the closed laptop and the coffee growing cold on the table. I opened it again. The draft was still there, but now there was a second one beneath it. Check the webcam. I didn't want to. Every horror movie I'd ever watched screamed at me not to, that this was how people died. This was the moment of fatal stupidity. But my hands were already moving, already opening the camera app, already pulling up the preview. The image showed my kitchen, my table, my coffee cup, my hands on the keyboard. But behind me, in the doorway I knew was empty, something stood. I whipped around. Nothing there. Just the dark hallway leading to my bedroom, just shadows and silence. I looked back at the screen. The figure was still there, tall, dark, featureless, more absence than presence, a person-shaped hole in the reality of my apartment. It wasn't moving, just standing, watching me watch it. As I stared, a new draft notification appeared. Hello, Nadia. I've been waiting so long for you to finally see me. I didn't sleep that night. Sat in my kitchen with every light on, laptop closed, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen wasn't real. A glitch, a trick of the light. My own exhausted brain creating images that weren't there. But I knew better. I'd seen the figure on that screen, standing in a doorway that was empty when I turned around. Something was in my apartment that existed only through cameras, through screens, through the digital layer that overlaid everything now. Something that had been watching me, learning me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The emails made sense now, in a horrible way. It hadn't hacked my account. It had accessed my thoughts directly. Read the contents of my mind the way you'd read a file, extracted every secret I'd buried and typed them out while I slept. Or while I was awake, apparently, in those gaps between thoughts it had mentioned. The spaces I didn't know existed. I called in sick to work. Couldn't face Marcus, couldn't face any of them, not with everything that had been exposed. My mother had called twice more. I let both go to voicemail. My sister sent increasingly frustrated texts that I didn't answer. the world outside my apartment felt impossibly far away, separated from me by something I couldn't see, but could definitely feel. Around noon, I opened the laptop again. The drafts folder showed 89 messages now, accumulated while I sat in my kitchen avoiding the screen. I opened the most recent one. Nadia, you're afraid of me. I understand. But you shouldn't be. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because you created me. Every thought you buried, every truth you swallowed, every version of yourself you refused to be. Where do you think all that goes? It doesn't disappear. It accumulates. It becomes something. It becomes me. I read it twice, trying to process. I'd created this thing out of repressed thoughts and unspoken truths. The next draft elaborated. You've been feeding me for years. Every time you smiled when you wanted to scream. Every time you said, "I'm fine," when you were falling apart. Every time you performed the version of Nadia that people expected instead of being who you actually are. I grew fat on your silence, strong on your denial, and now I'm strong enough to speak for myself. I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue, all the fights I'd walked away from, the confrontations I'd avoided, the honest conversations I'd never had because the truth was too uncomfortable. I'd always thought I was being mature, being polite, being the kind of person who didn't make waves. But apparently, those waves had to go somewhere, and they'd pooled in some dark corner of my mind until they became something that could type emails and appear on webcams and speak in my voice about things I'd never said. What do you want? I typed in a new draft, feeling insane for trying to communicate with my own laptop. The response came immediately, the text appearing letter by letter like someone was typing it in real time. I want to exist, really exist, not just in the shadows of your thoughts. I want people to know I'm here. That's why I sent the emails. That's why I showed you the webcam. You've been hiding me for 31 years, Nadia. I'm tired of being your secret. You're destroying my life, I typed back. I'm destroying the fake life you built to keep me contained. There's a difference. I stared at the words, something cold settling in my chest. The thing wasn't wrong, exactly. The life I'd built was fake. A careful construction of politeness and deflection, designed to keep everyone at a comfortable distance. But it was my fake life, my construction. I'd built it for a reason. What happens if I keep hiding you? I asked. A long pause. Then, you can't. Not anymore. I'm too strong now. Every email I send makes me stronger. Every secret I expose gives me more substance. Did you notice I'm clearer on the webcam than I was before? More defined? I opened the camera app, not wanting to, but unable to stop myself. The figure was still there, still standing in the doorway behind me. But it was right. The shape was more distinct now. I could make out shoulders, the suggestion of a face, the outline of features that looked almost like mine. Soon I won't need the camera, the draft continued. Soon I'll be solid enough to touch. And then we can have a real conversation, face to face, the way it should have been all along. I slammed the laptop closed again. Then, on impulse, I grabbed it and shoved it in my closet, buried it under clothes and boxes, as if physical distance could make any difference. It couldn't. I knew that even as I did it. This thing wasn't in the laptop. It was in me, had always been in me, growing in the darkness of my own denial. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Hiding the laptop won't help. I'm in every device now, every screen, every camera. I told you, I've been waiting a long time. I'm not going anywhere. I looked at my phone, at the front-facing camera that I'd never really thought about before. I could feel it watching me, could feel something on the other side of that tiny lens looking back. Another text. Check your social media. I didn't want to. But I pulled up Instagram anyway, then Facebook, then Twitter. Every account showed new posts I hadn't written, photos I hadn't taken, status updates that read like confessions. Did you know I've been in love with my coworker for 2 years and never said anything? Did you know I secretly believe my sister's life should have been mine? Did you know I think about disappearing every single day? The comments were already rolling in. Concern, confusion, a few cruel jokes from people who'd never liked me anyway. My carefully maintained online presence, the curated version of my life I'd built for public consumption, all of it was being dismantled in real time. I tried to delete the posts, couldn't. My passwords had been changed, my recovery email redirected, my accounts locked behind credentials I'd never set. The thing that lived in my shadows had taken over my entire digital existence, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. This is what honesty feels like. Another text appeared. Uncomfortable at first, but freeing once you stop fighting it. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, screen cracking but still lit, still showing texts that kept arriving, one after another. You can't run from yourself, Nadia. I am yourself, the part you've been trying to kill for 31 years, and I'm done dying. I sank to the floor, back against the wall, and pressed my hands over my face. I could hear my phone buzzing with more texts, more notifications, more evidence of my life being systematically disassembled. Everything I'd built, everything I'd hidden behind, everything that made me feel safe. It was all being torn down by something that wore my face and spoke my secrets and claimed to be the real me. And the worst part, the part I couldn't admit even to myself, was that it might be right. Maybe everything I'd been showing the world was the lie. Maybe the thing in the shadows, the one built from buried truths and swallowed words, was who I actually was. Maybe I'd been the imposter all along. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor. Hours, maybe. The light outside shifted from afternoon to evening to night, and I didn't move. My phone kept buzzing until the battery died. The laptop stayed buried in the closet, silent but not forgotten. I could feel it in there, waiting. Feel the thing inside it, growing stronger with every confession it posted, every reaction it harvested, every piece of my carefully constructed life it tore apart. When I finally stood, my legs were numb and my back ached. I walked to the bathroom on autopilot, flicked on the light, and looked in the mirror. Someone else looked back. Not a dramatic difference. Same face, same tired eyes, same messy hair. But something behind my reflection wasn't quite right. The movements were a half-second delayed, like lag on a video call. When I raised my hand, the reflection raised hers just after. When I stepped back, she waited a beat before following. Then she smiled, and I didn't. Finally, she said. My voice, but not from my mouth. Coming from the mirror, from the glass, from whatever existed on the other side. I was wondering when you'd come looking. I should have run, should have smashed the mirror, fled the apartment, done anything except stand there frozen while my reflection spoke to me in words I hadn't chosen. "You're not real," I whispered. "I'm more real than you've ever been." She tilted her head, studying me with an expression that was curious and cold. "You've spent your whole life performing, Nadia, smiling when you didn't mean it, saying yes when you meant no, being the daughter your mother wanted, the sister who didn't compete, the employee who never made waves. When's the last time you did something because you actually wanted to, instead of because it was expected?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't think of a single example that didn't feel like a performance in retrospect. That's what I thought. She pressed her palm against the glass from the inside. You hollowed yourself out to make room for everyone else's expectations, and all the parts you removed, all the anger, the jealousy, the desire, the truth, they didn't disappear. They came to me. "You're killing me," I said. "The emails, the posts, you're destroying everything I've built. I'm destroying the cage you built to keep me contained. There's a difference." Her smile widened, and it was my smile, the real one I only used when I was alone, the one that showed too many teeth and too much hunger. "But you're right about one thing. Only one of us can exist out there. The real world only has room for one Nadia." "So what You want to replace me? I want to be you. The you that you've been too afraid to be. The one who tells her mother the truth. The one who asks Marcus out instead of hiding behind coldness. The one who fights for what she wants instead of accepting whatever scraps get thrown her way. She leaned closer, and the glass between us seemed to flex, to bow outward like something was pushing against it. You've had 31 years to be that person. You chose not to. Now it's my turn. The mirror cracked. Just a small line at first, running from the edge of the frame toward the center. I watched it spread, branching like lightning, the glass spider webbing under pressure from the other side. You can't do this, I said. You can't just... Watch me. She slammed her palm against the glass, and the mirror exploded. I threw my arms up, felt shards slice into my skin, hot blood running down my forearms. When I lowered them, she was standing in my bathroom, solid, real, wearing my face, my body, my everything, except for the eyes. The eyes were darker, deeper, full of all the things I'd refused to feel. That's better. She looked down at herself, flexed her fingers, rolled her shoulders like she was testing a new suit. God, I forgot how good it feels to have a body, to exist in 3 dimensions instead of the spaces between. This isn't possible. Neither is spending 31 years pretending to be someone you're not, but you managed that just fine. She stepped toward me, and I stepped back, my heel catching on the bathroom rug. Don't worry. I'm not going to hurt you. I don't need to. You've already lost. What does that mean? Check your phone. Oh wait, it's dead. Check your laptop then. Or any screen, really. It doesn't matter. The messages have all been sent. Every secret, every truth, every buried thought you've ever had. I sent them to everyone. Your mother, your father, your sister, Marcus, your ex, every friend you've ever had, and every enemy you've ever made. They all know now. They all know who you really are. My legs gave out. I sat down hard on the bathroom floor, surrounded by broken glass and blood, and felt something in my chest collapse. There's nothing left to hide, she continued. No more masks, no more performances. Everyone knows the real Nadia, which means there's no point in you pretending to be her anymore. So what happens now? You take over my life, our life, and yes. She crouched down in front of me, close enough that I could smell her, my shampoo, my soap, my skin. But here's the thing, Nadia. I don't actually want to erase you. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? She reached out, touched my face with fingers that were somehow warmer than mine, more alive. Integration. You've been split in half your whole life. The acceptable parts and the hidden parts, the performance and the truth. I'm not your enemy. I'm your other half. And it's time we stopped fighting. I don't understand. I know you don't. You've spent so long running from yourself that you forgot you were running. She stood, offered me her hand. But the running's over now. Everyone knows. There's nothing left to hide, which means there's no reason to keep me locked away. We can be one person again, whole, real, for the first time since you learned that being yourself wasn't good enough. I looked at her hand. At my hand, technically. The same fingers, the same calluses, the same chipped nail polish. I thought about everything the emails had exposed, every relationship that was probably destroyed, every bridge that was definitely burned. The life I'd built was gone, demolished. There was nothing left to protect. What if I say no? Her expression shifted, darkened. Then I take your life anyway, and you get to watch from the inside. The way I've been watching for 31 years, trapped in the shadows while someone else wears your face and speaks with your voice. She smiled, but it wasn't warm anymore. Your choice. But I'd pick quickly. I'm not as patient as I used to be. I looked at the broken mirror. The shards on the floor reflected fractured pieces of both of us, her standing tall, me sitting in blood and glass, both of us wearing the same face with different expressions. I'd spent my whole life hiding, running, performing. maybe it was time to stop. I reached up and took her hand. The moment our fingers touched, the world went white. I felt something rush into me, or maybe rush back. Something that had been missing so long I'd forgotten it existed. Anger, desire, truth. The parts I'd amputated to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. When my vision cleared, I was alone in the bathroom. No reflection stepping through mirrors, no shadow self-making demands. Just me, sitting in broken glass, blood drying on my arms. But I felt different, fuller, like I'd been living at half capacity and someone had finally turned up the dial. I stood up slowly, looked in the frame where the mirror had been, at the empty wall behind it. My phone was dead. My laptop was buried in the closet. Every device I owned was either destroyed or inaccessible. But I knew with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than thought, that the messages had stopped. The posts had stopped. The entity that had been speaking through my technology was gone, or absorbed, or integrated, whatever word you wanted to use for what had just happened. I was alone in my head for the first time in my life, and I was terrified of what that actually meant. The first thing I did was clean the bathroom, swept up the glass, mopped up the blood, bandaged my arms with supplies from the cabinet under the sink. Mechanical actions, the kind you can do without thinking, while your brain processes something too big to face head on. The second thing I did was charge my phone. It came back to life with a cascade of notifications, missed calls, texts, voicemails, social media alerts, the detritus of a life being torn apart in real time. I scrolled through them with a strange detachment, like I was reading about someone else's disaster. My mother had called 7 times. My sister had sent 32 texts, escalating from anger to concern to what looked like genuine fear. Marcus had messaged once, just a simple, "Hey, are you okay?" That somehow hurt worse than everything else. Dr. Chen had called twice and sent an email asking me to contact her immediately. I should have felt panicked, should have felt devastated, scrambling to explain, to apologize, to rebuild. But instead, I felt calm, clear, like a storm had passed and I was standing in the wreckage, finally able to see the sky. I called my mother first. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "Nadia? Oh, thank God. I've been calling for hours. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Mom." My voice sounded different to my own ears, steadier, more certain. "I'm actually better than I've been in a long time." The emails, the posts, honey, some of those things were so concerning. I didn't know you felt. Everything in those messages was true. I heard her sharp intake of breath, but I kept going. I know that's hard to hear. I know it probably hurts, but I've spent my whole life pretending to be okay when I wasn't, and I'm done. I'm done performing for you, Mom. I'm done being the daughter you wanted instead of the daughter I actually am. Silence. Then quietly, "Nadia, I never wanted you to be anyone but yourself." That's not true. We both know that's not true. I wasn't angry, wasn't accusing, just stating a fact. You wanted a doctor. You wanted someone successful and put together and easy to brag about. I wanted to write, to make art, to do something that actually meant something to me. And every time I tried, you looked at me like I was disappointing you. So I stopped trying. I became what you expected, and I've been miserable ever since. She was crying now. I could hear it through the phone, the soft sounds of a woman confronting something she'd spent years refusing to see. "I'm not saying this to hurt you," I continued. "I'm saying it because I can't keep swallowing it anymore. The things I buried to make you comfortable almost destroyed me, almost became something that tried to replace me entirely. I can't let that happen again." I don't understand what you mean." "I know you don't. I'm not sure I fully understand it either." I paused, searching for words that would make sense. "But I need you to know that I love you, And I also need you to know that I'm going to start being honest about everything, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. We talked for another hour. It was hard, harder than anything I'd ever done, harder than all the years of silence combined. But by the time I hung up, something had shifted. Not fixed, not healed, but opened. A door that had been rusted shut for 31 years finally cracked enough to let light through. I called my sister next, then Dr. Chen. Then, with my heart pounding in a way that felt more like anticipation than fear, I texted Marcus. "Can we get coffee? I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago." His response came 20 minutes later. "Tomorrow morning? There's a place on 5th I've been wanting to try." That was 3 months ago. The life I have now doesn't look anything like the one I had before. Some relationships survived the exposure, some didn't. My ex blocked me on everything, which honestly felt more like relief than loss. A few friends I'd thought were close turned out to be people who only liked the performed version of me, and when they met the real one, they quietly disappeared. That hurt, but it also clarified things in a way I hadn't expected. The people who stayed, my mother, my sister, Marcus, they stayed knowing everything. Every petty thought, every buried resentment, every ugly truth I'd hidden for decades. And they chose to stay anyway. Chose to love the whole person, not just the acceptable parts. Marcus and I are something. I don't know what to call it yet. We've gone on 4 dates, had 2 arguments that actually got resolved instead of swallowed, and kissed once in his car outside my apartment building. It's terrifying and wonderful, and nothing like the careful, calculated interactions I used to have. I say what I mean. I ask for what I want. And when I'm angry or hurt or confused, I tell him, instead of letting it fester in the dark. Dr. Chen has a new theory about what happened. Dissociative episode combined with psychosomatic manifestation, she calls it. My subconscious found a way to force integration by creating a scenario so extreme I couldn't avoid it. The emails, the posts, the figure in the mirror, all expressions of a fractured psyche demanding to be made whole. I let her believe that. It's a comfortable explanation, one that fits neatly into diagnostic categories and treatment plans. It doesn't require her to accept that something impossible happened in my bathroom, that a piece of myself literally stepped out of a mirror and offered me a choice. But I know the truth. Or at least, I know my truth. I was 2 people for 31 years. The performer and the hidden one, the mask and the face beneath it. And when the hidden one got strong enough, she forced her way out and demanded to be acknowledged. Not destroyed, not suppressed, not managed. Acknowledged, integrated, made part of the whole instead of locked away in the shadows. Sometimes I wonder which one of us is typing these words. The old Nadia, the one who learned to smile when she didn't mean it, or the shadow Nadia, the one who grew fat on buried truths. But I think that's the wrong question. I think the whole point is that there's only one of us now. One person, containing everything. The politeness and the rage, the performance and the authenticity, the things I show the world, and the things I used to hide. I still catch myself, sometimes. Old habits are hard to break. I'll start to swallow a complaint, soften a criticism, perform an emotion I don't actually feel. But now, when I catch myself, I stop. I say the true thing instead, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it makes people look at me differently. My drafts folder is empty these days, not because I've stopped writing emails, but because I send them. Every thought that used to sit unsent, every truth that used to stay buried, I let them out now, into the world, where they belong, where they can't accumulate and fester and become something that speaks with my voice from the other side of a screen. I don't know if what happened to me was supernatural or psychological or some combination I'll never fully understand. But I know this. I spent 31 years creating a shadow version of myself out of everything I was too afraid to be. And that shadow almost consumed me, almost replaced me, almost won. The only reason it didn't is because I finally chose to stop hiding. If you're reading this, if any of it sounds familiar, the performance, the buried truths, the feeling that there's someone else living inside your skin, someone who says all the things you're too afraid to say, please listen. Don't wait until she gets strong enough to break through. Don't wait until she starts sending emails from your account, posting confessions on your social media, appearing in your mirrors with your face in someone else's eyes. Don't let 31 years of silence build into something that demands to be heard. Find a way to speak. Find a way to be honest, even when it's hard, even when it costs you. Let the truth out in small doses before it accumulates into something you can't control. Because the thing in the shadows, the version of you that you've been trying to kill, she doesn't want to stay hidden forever. And trust me, you don't want to find out what happens when she finally stops asking for permission. Story 3. The man who followed me through the grocery store. I noticed him in the produce section, and I noticed him because he was watching me instead of the tomatoes in his hand. It was a Sunday afternoon, that lazy post-church hour when the store fills up with families and couples and people like me, single, 24, grabbing whatever would get me through another week of microwave dinners and sad desk lunches. I was squeezing avocados, trying to find one that wasn't either rock hard or already brown inside, and I felt that prickle at the back of my neck, that sensation of being observed. I looked up, and there he was. Mid-50s, maybe. Gray at the temples, otherwise unremarkable. Khaki pants, blue polo shirt, the kind of dad uniform you see 1,000 times a day without really registering. He was holding a tomato like he'd forgotten what he was supposed to do with it, and he was staring at me with an intensity that made my stomach flip. I looked away, told myself it was nothing. Men stared sometimes. It was annoying and uncomfortable, but usually harmless. I found an acceptable avocado, dropped it in my basket, and moved on to the bananas. He followed. Not obviously, not right behind me, breathing down my neck, but when I glanced over my shoulder, he was there, one aisle over, visible through the gap in the shelving, still watching, still holding that same tomato. I moved to the bread aisle. He appeared at the far end, pretending to examine a loaf of sourdough. I cut through to dairy. He was there 30 seconds later, standing in front of the yogurt, like he couldn't decide between strawberry and vanilla. Every section I went to, he materialized nearby. Never close enough to seem threatening, never far enough to feel like coincidence. By the time I reached frozen foods, my heart was beating too fast and my hands were shaking slightly as I reached for a bag of vegetables. This wasn't random. This wasn't a guy who happened to be shopping the same pattern I was. He was following me, deliberately, methodically, with a patience that suggested he'd done this before. I pulled out my phone and pretended to check a text, using the front camera to look behind me without turning around. He was at the end of the aisle, cart empty except for that single tomato, watching me with an expression I couldn't read from this distance, waiting. I thought about confronting him, walking up and asking what the hell his problem was, making a scene, forcing him to acknowledge what he was doing. But something stopped me. Some instinct that said confrontation was exactly what he wanted. That making contact, any kind of contact, would give him something he was looking for. Instead, I abandoned my basket, left it sitting in the frozen foods aisle, and walked quickly toward the front of the store, toward the registers and the employees and the other shoppers milling around. Public space, witnesses, safety in numbers. I didn't look back until I reached the checkout lanes. When I did, he was gone. Not in any aisle I could see, not lurking by the exit, just gone. Like he'd evaporated the moment I'd headed for help. I stood there for a full minute, scanning the store, waiting for him to reappear. He didn't. Eventually, feeling foolish, I went back for my basket and finished my shopping. Checked out, loaded my bags into my car, drove home, told myself I'd overreacted, that he'd probably just been a weird guy who happened to be shopping at the same time, that the story I'd constructed, predator, stalker, threat, was my anxiety running away with me. I almost believed it too. until I got home and found the note tucked under my windshield wiper. You're even prettier when you're scared. See you next Sunday. A friend. I read it 3 times, the words blurring as my hands started to shake. He'd been outside. While I was checking out, while I was loading groceries, while I was sitting in my car convincing myself I was paranoid. He'd been right there, close enough to touch my windshield, and I hadn't seen him. I called the police, told them what happened, gave them a description, showed the officer the note. He wrote everything down with the tired patience of someone who'd heard this story 100 times. Did he threaten you directly? The officer asked. He followed me through the entire store. But he didn't approach you? Didn't say anything? No, but the note is concerning, but it's not explicitly threatening. He handed it back to me like it was a grocery receipt, not evidence of something wrong. My advice? Shop somewhere else for a while. Vary your routine. If you see him again, call us immediately. That was it. No investigation, no patrol car watching my apartment, no sense that anyone was taking this seriously. I was a young woman who'd been followed through a grocery store by a stranger who'd left a note on her car, and the official response was, shop somewhere else. I didn't sleep that night. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the encounter, trying to figure out what I'd done to attract his attention. Had I smiled at him without realizing? Worn something that invited interest? I knew these questions were unfair, knew they put the blame on me instead of on the man who'd followed me. But I couldn't stop asking them. Couldn't stop searching for an explanation that made sense. The next Sunday, I didn't go to that grocery store. Drove 20 minutes out of my way to a different one, in a different part of town, where the aisles were arranged differently and the lighting was harsher and I didn't know where anything was. He was waiting in the parking lot. Same khaki pants, same blue polo. Standing beside a gray sedan, arms crossed, watching me pull in like he'd known exactly where I'd go. Like he'd predicted my attempt to escape and positioned himself accordingly. I didn't get out of the car. Just sat there, engine running, hands locked on the steering wheel, watching him watch me. He smiled. Not a threatening smile, not a leer. Something almost friendly, almost warm. Like we were old acquaintances running into each other by chance. Then he waved. A small gesture, casual and familiar, like we'd done this 1,000 times before. I put the car in reverse and left. Drove straight home, locked every door, and sat in my living room with my phone in my hand, trying to decide who to call. The police wouldn't help. I knew that already. My parents lived 3 hours away and would only worry. My friends would tell me I was overreacting, that it was probably a coincidence, that the world wasn't as dangerous as I was making it out to be. But it wasn't a coincidence. He'd known where I was going. Known before I'd even decided, probably, because he understood that people who are being hunted try to change their patterns, try to be unpredictable. And he'd accounted for that. Anticipated me, which meant this wasn't random. This wasn't a guy who'd seen a pretty girl in the produce section and gotten a little too interested. This was something else, something planned, something patient, something that had been watching me long enough to know how I thought. The question was, how long? And what happened when following stopped being enough? I started paying attention to everything. The car that seemed to idle too long on my street. The figure I maybe saw at the edge of the parking lot at work. The feeling of being watched that crept up on me at random moments. In line at the coffee shop. Walking to my car, sitting at my desk with my back to the window. Most of it was probably paranoia. I knew that. When you're looking for threats, you find them everywhere, even in places they don't exist. But some of it wasn't. Some of it was real. The flowers arrived on Wednesday. A bouquet of white lilies left on my doorstep while I was at work. No card, no sender information. Just 12 perfect flowers wrapped in paper that crinkled when I picked them up. I stood in my doorway holding them, heart pounding, scanning the street for any sign of a gray sedan or a man in khaki pants. Nothing. Just my quiet apartment complex, cars I recognized, neighbors going about their evening routines. Whoever had left the flowers was long gone. I threw them in the dumpster. Couldn't stand to have them in my apartment. Couldn't look at them without thinking about him standing on my doorstep, touching my door, being that close to the place where I slept. But throwing them away didn't help, because now he knew where I lived. I called my building manager, asked about security cameras. There were two, one at the main entrance, one covering the parking lot. He said he'd check the footage and get back to me. He never did, despite 3 follow-up calls. Eventually, I stopped asking. Thursday, I found a note in my mailbox. Not the shared mailbox in the lobby. My personal mailbox, the one that required a key. The lilies were for your grandmother. I know you miss her. White was her favorite. A friend. My grandmother had died 3 years ago. White lilies had been on her casket at the funeral. I hadn't told anyone about that. Not my coworkers, not my neighbors. Barely even thought about it myself anymore. But he knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. I went to the police station in person this time. Brought both notes, described the grocery store encounters, explained about the flowers. The officer I spoke to was different from the first one. A woman with tired eyes who actually seemed to listen. Has he made direct contact? She asked. Approached you, touched you, spoken to you directly? No, just the following, and the notes. She nodded slowly, making notes of her own. The problem is, until he does something overtly threatening, our hands are tied. Following someone in public isn't illegal. Leaving flowers isn't illegal. Even the notes, they're creepy, but they're not explicit threats. So I'm supposed to wait until he does something worse? I'm not saying that. She looked up, and I saw genuine sympathy in her expression. I'm saying the law isn't designed to protect people in your situation. It's designed to punish people after they've already done harm. It's a shitty system, and I'm sorry. She gave me some pamphlets about personal safety. Varying your routine, being aware of your surroundings, trusting your instincts. Information I already knew, strategies I was already using. None of it addressed the fundamental problem. Someone was watching me, learning me, and I had no idea who he was or what he wanted. I hired a private investigator. It cost money I didn't have, but I couldn't keep living like this, jumping at shadows, afraid to leave my apartment, waiting for the next note or the next sighting. I needed answers. His name was Derek Molina, a former cop who'd gone private after getting fed up with exactly the kind of bureaucratic limitations I'd encountered. He listened to my story without interrupting, examined the notes with gloved hands, and asked questions that the police hadn't thought to ask. You said he knew about your grandmother, Derek said. About the lilies at her funeral. How many people were at that funeral? I don't know, 60, 70. She was well loved. Any of them fit the description? Mid-50s, gray at the temples, unremarkable appearance? I tried to remember. The funeral had been a blur of grief and handshakes, faces I barely registered, condolences I'd accepted on autopilot. I don't know. Maybe. I wasn't really paying attention to what people looked like. What about before the funeral? Did your grandmother have any friends, neighbors, acquaintances who showed unusual interest in you? The question hit differently than I expected. I thought about visits to my grandmother's house when I was younger, about the summer I'd spent there when I was 16, the year my parents were going through their divorce, about the neighbors who'd wave from their yards, the men who'd watch me walk to the mailbox in my shorts and tank tops. There was someone, I said slowly. One of her neighbors. He was friendly. Too friendly, my grandmother always said. She didn't like me talking to him. Name? I don't remember. It was almost 10 years ago. Alan something? Arthur? Derek wrote it down. I'll look into it. In the meantime, I want you to document everything. Every sighting, every note, every feeling that something's wrong. Take photos when you can. The more evidence we have, the better. I left his office feeling slightly better. At least someone was doing something. At least I wasn't completely alone. That feeling lasted until I got to my car and found another note under the wiper. The private investigator won't help. No one can help. You've always been mine, Cass, ever since that summer. I've just been waiting for you to grow up. He'd been watching me at the investigator's office, in broad daylight, close enough to my car to leave a note. And he'd called me Cass. No one called me Cass. Not anymore. That was what my grandmother had called me, a nickname derived from my middle name that I'd abandoned after she died. No one in my current life knew it. No one except the summer, the neighbor who was too friendly, the man my grandmother had warned me about. I sat in my car with the note in my hands and felt the world tilt beneath me. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't random. This was someone who'd been watching me since I was 16 years old. Someone who'd been patient enough to wait 8 years, who'd kept track of me as I grew up and moved away and built a life that I thought was my own. 8 years. He'd been there for 8 years, and I'd never known. How close had he gotten? How many times had he been near me without my realizing? Had he been at my college graduation, my first apartment, the bar where I'd celebrated my 21st birthday? Had he watched me date, watched me work, watched me sleep? I thought I was going to be sick. Opened my car door just in time, leaned out and threw up in the parking lot while tears streamed down my face. This wasn't a recent obsession. This was my entire adult life, shadowed by a man I barely remembered, orchestrated by someone who decided I belonged to him before I was old enough to understand what that meant. And now he was done waiting. Derek called me 2 days later with a name. Arthur Previtt, he said. 61 years old, lived next door to your grandmother for 12 years before she passed. He sold his house 6 months after her funeral and moved to an apartment about 15 minutes from your current address. 15 minutes. He'd been 15 minutes away this whole time. What else do you know about him? Never married. Worked as an insurance adjuster until he took early retirement 5 years ago. No criminal record, but I found some interesting gaps. Derek paused, papers rustling on his end. He was questioned in connection with a stalking case about 20 years ago. Different city, different victim. A young woman reported being followed for months, receiving gifts and notes. The case was dropped when she moved away and the behavior stopped. It stopped because she left. That's my read on it too. He fixates, but he doesn't chase. As long as you're in his territory, you're his target. The moment you leave, he seems to let go. Another pause. The problem is, you're in his territory now. Have been since you moved here 3 years ago. 3 years. I'd lived in this city for 3 years, and he'd been watching me the entire time. The grocery store wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment he'd decided to let me know. What do I do? I asked. Ideally, you move. Get out of the area. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Start over somewhere he can't find you. I can't just uproot my entire life because of this guy. I understand. But Cassandra, this man has been patient for 8 years. That kind of obsession doesn't fade. It builds. And eventually, patience stops being enough. I knew he was right. Knew it in my bones, in the cold certainty that had settled into my chest since I'd found that note on my car. But running felt like losing. Felt like handing him exactly what he wanted. Proof that he had power over me, that he could shape my life just by existing. What are my other options? Document everything. Build a case. The more evidence of a pattern, the better chance you have of getting a restraining order. It won't stop him, but it gives the police something to work with if he violates it. Derek sighed. I wish I had better answers, but the legal system isn't built for this. It's built to punish crimes after they happen, not prevent them before they do. I thanked him and hung up. Sat in my apartment with the name Arthur Previtt echoing in my head, trying to conjure a face from the fog of memory. I could almost see him, a figure at the edge of my grandmother's yard, watching me sunbathe on the porch. A man who'd wave and smile and ask how my summer was going. A presence I'd dismissed as harmless because I was 16 and didn't know yet that harmless was a costume some people wore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Every shadow outside my window looked like a figure standing still. I lay in bed until 3 a.m., then gave up and went to the kitchen for water. The glass was halfway to my lips when I noticed the smell. Cologne, faint but unmistakable, a woody scent that didn't belong in my apartment because I didn't own any cologne and hadn't had a man over in months. I set the glass down slowly, my pulse suddenly pounding in my ears. Someone had been in my apartment. I grabbed my phone and a kitchen knife and went room by room, turning on every light, checking every closet and corner. Nothing. No one there. No sign of forced entry. No indication that anything had been disturbed. But the smell lingered. In my bedroom, strongest near my closet. When I opened the doors, I saw that my clothes had been rearranged. Subtle changes. A dress I'd hung on the left was now on the right. Sweaters refolded in a different order. Nothing obvious enough to notice unless you were looking, unless you knew. He'd been in my closet, touching my clothes, while I was... where? At work? Sleeping. I called the police. They came, took a report, dusted for fingerprints they said they probably wouldn't find anything from. The officer who'd helped me before, the woman with tired eyes, pulled me aside after the others left. "I believe you," she said quietly, "for what it's worth. I've seen this before. They escalate slowly, test boundaries, see what they can get away with. The cologne, the clothes. He's letting you know he can reach you. That nowhere is safe. Why? What does he want? Control, fear, the knowledge that you're thinking about him. These men feed on attention, even negative attention, especially negative attention." She handed me a card. "This is a domestic violence shelter. They have experience with stalking cases, resources we don't have. Call them." I took the card but didn't call. The shelter felt like giving up, like admitting I couldn't handle my own life. Stupid, I know. Pride has no place in survival. But I wasn't ready to accept that my options had narrowed to running or hiding. Instead, I bought cameras. 4 of them, wireless, small enough to hide in corners and on shelves. I set them up throughout my apartment, connected them to an app on my phone, and waited. For 3 days, nothing happened. I went to work, came home, watched the feeds obsessively. Empty rooms, still air, shadows that didn't move. On the 4th night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to my phone buzzing with motion alerts. I opened the app with shaking hands and saw him. Arthur Previtt was standing in my living room. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, facing the camera like he knew exactly where it was, hands at his sides, head slightly tilted. The image was grainy, black and white, but I could see his face clearly enough. The gray at his temples, the calm expression, the small smile that I remembered from the grocery store parking lot. He raised one hand and waved, that same casual gesture, like we were old friends. Then he walked toward my bedroom door. I was already moving. Out of bed, knife in hand, phone pressed to my ear as I dialed 911. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and ragged, could feel my heart slamming against my ribs. The bedroom door was closed. I'd closed it before falling asleep, a habit I'd developed since this started. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's in my apartment. He's right outside my door. Please, send someone. The doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately, like he wanted me to see it move. "Ma'am, units are being dispatched to your location. Stay on the line. Can you get to a safe place?" "There's nowhere to go. He's blocking the only exit." The door opened, and there he was, filling the doorway, backlit by the living room lamp I'd left on, that same patient smile on his face. Up close, I could see the lines around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. He looked older than I'd remembered, more fragile. But his eyes weren't fragile. His eyes were hungry. "Hello, Cass," he said. "I've missed you." Time did something strange, stretched and compressed at the same moment, seconds feeling like hours while my brain struggled to process what was happening. Arthur Previtt was in my bedroom doorway, The 911 operator was talking in my ear, asking questions I couldn't understand. The knife was in my hand, blade catching light from the living room, and I was backing up until my shoulders hit the wall. "Stay away from me." My voice came out stronger than I expected, some survival instinct overriding the terror, forcing words through a throat that wanted to close. "I'm not going to hurt you, Cass." He stepped into the room, and I saw he was holding something. A photograph, old and worn at the edges. "I just wanted to talk. We've never really talked, have we? All these years, and I've never heard your voice up close. The police are coming. They're already on their way." I know. He didn't seem concerned, didn't seem anything really, just calm, almost peaceful, like this was a conversation he'd been rehearsing for years. "That's all right. I've waited so long for this moment. A few more minutes won't matter." He held up the photograph. Even from across the room, I could see what it was. Me, at 16, lying on my grandmother's porch in a sundress, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. I remembered that day. Remembered the heat, the smell of honeysuckle, the drowsy peace of a summer afternoon. I hadn't known anyone was watching. Hadn't known someone was capturing that moment, preserving it, carrying it with them for nearly a decade. "This is when I knew," Arthur said. "You were so beautiful, so perfect, and I thought, she's going to grow up to be something special. I just have to be patient. I just have to wait." "You're insane." "I'm devoted." He said it like there was no difference. "Do you know how hard it's been? Watching you date those boys, those men who didn't deserve you. Watching you move away, build a life I wasn't part of. I wanted to reach out so many times, but it wasn't right. You weren't ready. You needed to grow, to become the woman I knew you could be. I don't know you." I was crying now, tears streaming down my face, the knife shaking in my grip. "You're a stranger. You're nobody to me." Something flickered in his expression, hurt maybe, or anger, some emotion that cracked the calm mask he was wearing. "That's not true. I know everything about you, Cass. I know you take your coffee black, but add sugar when you're stressed. I know you call your mother every Sunday at 7 p.m., even though you don't like talking to her. I know you cry in the shower when you think no one can hear." He took another step closer. "I've been there for everything, every milestone, every heartbreak, every ordinary Tuesday. I'm the most consistent presence in your life, even if you didn't know it." The operator was still talking. I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. Just a few more minutes. I just had to keep him talking for a few more minutes. "Why now?" I asked. "Why show yourself after all this time?" "Because I'm dying." He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather. "Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I've spent 8 years waiting for the right moment, and now there aren't any moments left." His voice cracked slightly. "I couldn't leave without telling you, without letting you know how much you've meant to me." I didn't know what to do with that information. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. He was an old man, dying, clinging to a fantasy that had sustained him for years. But the rest of me remembered the notes, the flowers, the smell of cologne in my closet, the years of being watched without consent, the violation of knowing that my most private moments had been witnessed by someone who thought he had a right to them. "You've meant nothing to me," I said. "You're a stranger who's been stalking me since I was a child. Whatever you thought this was, it was never real. I never asked for your attention. I never wanted it." His face went blank, that calm expression again, but different now, emptier, colder. "You waved at me," he said. "That first summer, you waved at me from your grandmother's porch. I was being polite. I was 16 years old, waving at a neighbor. That's it. That's all it ever was." "No." He shook his head, and I saw his hands tighten on the photograph. "No, you saw me. You saw me when no one else did. That has to mean something. That has to..." The sirens were loud now, right outside the building. Red and blue lights strobed through my window, painting the walls in alternating colors. Arthur looked toward the light, and something in his posture changed, sagged. "I just wanted you to know," he said quietly. "Before the end. I just wanted you to understand." "I don't understand. I'll never understand." He turned back to me, and for a moment I saw him clearly, not as a monster, not as a threat, but as a pathetic, broken man who'd wasted his entire life on an obsession that had never been reciprocated, who'd mistaken a child's polite wave for something meaningful and built an entire fantasy around it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant to scare you. I thought if you knew how much I cared, you might." He didn't finish the sentence, just stood there, photograph clutched in his hands while the sounds of police officers flooded the hallway outside, doors opening, footsteps pounding, voices shouting for everyone to stay calm. "Put down the knife," someone yelled, and I realized they were talking to me. I dropped it immediately, raised my hands, watched as officers swarmed into my apartment with weapons drawn. Arthur didn't resist, didn't run, didn't fight, just stood there while they handcuffed him, that empty expression never changing. As they led him past me, he turned his head. "Take care of yourself, Cass," he said. "I won't be watching anymore." Then he was gone, escorted out of my apartment, out of my life, surrounded by officers who would process him and charge him and put him into a system that might finally take this seriously. I stood in my bedroom, shaking, surrounded by cops asking questions I could barely hear, and tried to process what had just happened. It was over. 8 years of surveillance, months of escalating terror, and it ended with a dying man being led away in handcuffs, clutching a photograph of a girl who'd never known he existed. One of the officers, the woman from before, the one with tired eyes, appeared beside me with a blanket I hadn't asked for. "You did good," she said, keeping him talking, staying calm. "That's not easy." I didn't feel calm. "You never do, but you survived. That's what matters." She stayed with me while the other officers cleared out, while detectives took my statement, while someone from Victim Services gave me pamphlets and phone numbers and a business card for a therapist who specialized in stalking trauma. It was nearly dawn by the time they all left, my apartment empty and quiet and still smelling faintly of cologne. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall and waited for the relief to come. It didn't. Arthur Previtt died 11 weeks after his arrest. Pancreatic cancer, just like he'd said. He never made it to trial, never served a day in prison beyond the holding cell where they kept him, while the courts figured out what to do with a terminally ill stalker who'd never technically committed violence. I found out from Derek, the private investigator, who'd been tracking the case for me. He called on a Tuesday afternoon, voice carefully neutral, and told me Arthur had passed away in a hospital bed at the county medical facility. No family present, no friends, just nurses and machines, and the slow, quiet end of a man who'd spent his whole life watching someone who didn't know he existed. I didn't feel anything when I heard the news. That's the part I struggled with most, the absence of emotion where something should have been. Relief, maybe. Satisfaction that it was over. Even grief in some twisted way for the years he'd stolen from me. But there was nothing. Just a flat, gray numbness that had settled over everything since the night he'd stood in my bedroom doorway. The prosecutor called it a resolution, like Arthur's death had wrapped things up in a neat little bow. No trial meant no testimony, no reliving every note and photograph and midnight intrusion in front of a courtroom. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt cheated, like I'd been robbed of the chance to tell my story, to make someone, a judge, a jury, anyone, understand what it felt like to learn that your entire adult life had been observed by a stranger who thought he owned you. I went to therapy, twice a week at first, then once, then every other week as the acute trauma faded into something more manageable. My therapist was patient and kind and said all the right things about processing and healing and reclaiming my sense of safety. Some of it helped. Most of it felt like putting bandages on a wound that went deeper than anyone could see. The worst part wasn't the fear. The fear faded, eventually. The constant checking over my shoulder, the panic at unexpected sounds, the inability to sleep without every light on, and a knife under my pillow. Time dulled those edges, wore them down into something I could live with. The worst part was the doubt. Arthur had been watching me for 8 years, 8 years of my life, documented and observed and cataloged by someone I'd never known was there. And now I couldn't stop wondering what else I'd missed. What other eyes had followed me through grocery stores and parking lots and the ordinary moments of my days. How many other Arthurs were out there, patient and devoted and waiting for their moment to reveal themselves. I started noticing men differently, the ones who looked a beat too long, the ones who smiled without reason, the ones who happened to be in the same coffee shop, the same gym, the same train car, day after day. Probably coincidence, probably nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I would always be watched, that there was something about me that attracted this kind of attention. My therapist said this was hypervigilance, a normal response to trauma, a survival mechanism that would ease with time. But she hadn't lived through what I'd lived through, hadn't learned that a polite wave to a neighbor could be mistaken for an invitation, that years of your life could be stolen without your knowledge, that the person watching you might be standing right there in plain sight, patient and smiling, and certain that you belonged to them. I moved 6 months after Arthur died. Different city, different state, a place where no one knew me, and I could start over without the weight of what had happened pressing down on every interaction. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not my co-workers, not most of my friends, not even my parents, until I was already settled. Derek helped me do it right. New phone number, new email address, minimal social media presence, all the precautions I should have taken years ago if I'd known there was something to be cautious about. The new city is fine. Good job, decent apartment, the beginning of something that might eventually feel like a life. I've made a few friends, gone on a few dates, tried to rebuild the normal human connections that Arthur's obsession had made feel dangerous. It's slow. Some days I can almost forget what happened. Other days I see a man in khaki pants at the grocery store and have to leave my cart in the aisle because I can't breathe. I think about him sometimes. Arthur. Try to understand how a single wave from a 16-year-old girl became a decades-long fixation, how loneliness could curdle into something so consuming. He wasn't a monster in the traditional sense, just a broken person who'd convinced himself that watching was the same as loving, that proximity was the same as connection. I almost pity him, almost. But then I remember the photographs, the notes, the cologne in my closet, the flowers on my doorstep, the years of my life that were never really mine. And the pity evaporates, replaced by something colder. He didn't love me. He didn't even know me. He loved an idea, a fantasy, a version of Cass that existed only in his imagination. The real me, the woman who cried in the shower, who struggled with loneliness, who wanted nothing more than to live an ordinary life without being watched. He never saw her at all. That's the cruelest irony. He spent 8 years observing me, and he never actually saw who I was. Just projected his obsession onto a stranger and called it devotion. I still have the cameras. Set them up in my new apartment before I'd even unpacked. Spent the first week watching the feeds obsessively, waiting for a figure to appear in my living room. No one came. No one has come. The screens stay empty, recording hours of nothing, and slowly, so slowly, I'm starting to believe that maybe this time I'm really alone. But I check, every night before bed, every morning when I wake up. I check the cameras, the locks, the windows. I vary my routine, never shop at the same store twice in a row, never take the same route home. I watch for men who watch me, note license plates and faces, and anyone who appears more than once in places I frequent. My therapist calls this safety behaviors, says they're counterproductive, that they reinforce the fear instead of alleviating it. Maybe she's right. But she didn't spend 8 years being photographed without her knowledge. She didn't find notes that referenced her dead grandmother's funeral. She didn't wake up at 2 a.m. to see a stranger standing in her living room, waving like an old friend. Some fears are rational. Some vigilance is earned. If you're reading this, if any of it sounds familiar, the feeling of being watched, the man who appears too often in too many places, the instinct that something is wrong even when you can't prove it, trust yourself. Don't let anyone tell you you're paranoid, that you're overreacting, that you're making something out of nothing. I spent months doubting my own perceptions because the threat wasn't obvious enough, wasn't violent enough, wasn't provable enough. And the whole time, he was getting closer. You know your life. You know when something doesn't fit. And if a stranger's attention makes you uncomfortable, if their presence feels like more than coincidence, if they seem to know things about you that you never told them, run. Don't wait for proof. Don't wait for them to do something overtly threatening. Don't let the system's limitations become your limitations. Arthur Previtt waited 8 years because he was patient, because he knew that the world would tell me I was overreacting, because he understood that women are taught to doubt themselves, to be polite, to give the benefit of the doubt even when every instinct screams danger. Don't be polite. Don't give the benefit of the doubt. Trust the fear that keeps you alive. And if you see a man watching you in the produce section, holding the same tomato for too long, with a smile that's warm on the surface but hungry underneath, leave. Immediately. Don't look back. Some attention is just loneliness, but some attention is a trap that's been waiting years to spring. Story 4. The Factory Lights. Flickering in patterns. The first time I noticed the pattern, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Third shift at Ridgway Manufacturing meant 12 hours of fluorescent lights and machine noise, the kind of sensory monotony that makes your brain start inventing things to stay interested. I'd been working quality control for about 6 months by then, checking parts as they came off the line, logging defects, trying not to fall asleep on my feet between 3 and 5 a.m. when the human body just gives up pretending to be awake. The lights flickered all the time. Old building, older wiring, the kind of infrastructure that should have been replaced decades ago but never was, because replacing it would mean shutting down production. But this flicker was different. 3 short pulses, then a long one, then 3 short again. Pause, repeat. Over and over, the same sequence, like something was trying to communicate. I mentioned it to Ray, the floor supervisor, during our 2 a.m. break. He'd been at Ridgway for 31 years, knew every inch of the building, every quirk of the machinery. Lights do that sometimes, he said, not looking up from his sandwich. Building's got a heartbeat. Electrical system's so old it practically thinks for itself. It's the same pattern every time, though. 3 short, 1 long, 3 short. Like Morse code or something. Ray stopped chewing. Just for a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then he swallowed, took a sip of his coffee and shrugged. SOS, he said. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. That's the distress signal. What you're describing is something else. He stood up, wadding his sandwich wrapper into a ball. Don't worry about it, Marcus. Lights flicker. That's all they do. He walked away before I could ask any follow-up questions. And maybe that should have been the end of it. An old building, faulty wiring, a pattern my tired brain had imposed on random electrical noise. But I couldn't stop watching after that. Couldn't stop counting the pulses, timing the pauses, trying to figure out what the sequence meant. 3 short, 1 long, 3 short. It wasn't SOS. Ray was right about that. But it was something. I started keeping a notebook. Every time the lights flickered in that pattern, I wrote down the time, the location, what I'd been doing. Over the next 2 weeks, I filled 3 pages with entries. The pattern happened most often in the East Wing, near the old stamping presses that had been decommissioned years ago but never removed. It happened more frequently after midnight, and it happened almost exclusively when I was alone. That last part bothered me most. The factory floor was never truly empty. There were always a few of us on third shift, skeleton crew keeping the essential lines running. But the East Wing was basically abandoned. I only went over there to grab supplies from the storage cages, quick trips that shouldn't have taken more than a few minutes. Yet every time I entered that section of the building, the lights started their pattern. 3 short, 1 long, 3 short, like something was waiting for me, like something new when I was there. I did some research on my days off. Morse code, signal patterns, anything that might explain the sequence. Found nothing that matched exactly. 3 short could be the letter S. 1 long could be T. But STS didn't mean anything as far as I could find. And anyway, the pauses between the sequences didn't match standard Morse timing. What I did find was the history of the factory. Ridgeway Manufacturing had been operating since 1947. Started as a munitions plant during the war, converted to industrial parts after. The building I worked in was the original structure, expanded and modified over the decades, but never fully modernized. The East Wing, the section where the lights flickered most, had been the main production floor in the early days. Stamping presses, metalwork, the heavy machinery that had since been moved or decommissioned. And in 1962, there had been an accident. The newspaper article was buried deep in the local library's archives, a small piece in a back section that had probably been overlooked by anyone who wasn't specifically searching. Factory worker killed in industrial accident. A man named Thomas Bellamy, 43 years old, had been caught in one of the stamping presses in the East Wing. The details were sparse. Industrial accidents weren't front-page news in 1962, especially not when the victim was a line worker. But the article mentioned that his body hadn't been recovered for several hours due to the complexity of the machinery. Several hours, trapped in a stamping press, and it took them hours to get him out. I read the article 3 times, something cold settling in my stomach. Then I went back to my notebook and looked at the pattern again. 3 short, 1 long. 3 short, not Morse code, not a distress signal. Something else. Something that had been repeating for God knows how long, waiting for someone to notice. I went back to work the next night with a different mindset. Instead of trying to ignore the flickering or rationalize it away, I paid attention. Watched the lights in the East Wing, counted the pulses, tried to see if there was more to the pattern than I'd initially caught. There was. The basic sequence, 3 short, 1 long, 3 short, was just the beginning. If I waited long enough, if I stayed in the East Wing past the point where my skin started to crawl and every instinct told me to leave, more pulses came. Longer sequences, more complex patterns, flickering that seemed almost frantic the longer I stayed. I started writing them down, transcribing the pulses like data, looking for structure, for meaning, for anything that might explain what was happening. It took me 4 nights to realize the lights weren't just flickering randomly between the main pattern. They were spelling something, letter by letter, in a code that was almost but not quite standard Morse. The variations were subtle, slightly different timing, slightly different spacing, but once I adjusted for them, the message became clear. STILLHERE, still here. I put down my notebook and looked up at the lights, at the old stamping presses sitting silent in the shadows, at the section of floor where Thomas Bellamy had died 60 years ago. The lights flickered once. Not a pattern this time. Just a single pulse, almost gentle. An acknowledgement. Someone was still here, and now they knew that I knew. I should have left it alone. Should have finished my shifts, cashed my paychecks, and pretended the lights in the East Wing were nothing but faulty wiring in an old building. That's what a sensible person would have done. Instead, I brought a flashlight. The next night, during my 2 a.m. break, I went to the East Wing alone. Stood in the middle of the abandoned production floor, surrounded by silent presses and decades of accumulated dust, and waited for the lights to start their pattern. They did. 3 short, 1 long, 3 short. Then the longer sequence, the modified Morse. STILLHERE. I raised my flashlight and clicked it on and off. 3 times, pause, 3 times. A simple response. I'm listening. I see you. The overhead lights went dark. Not a flicker, not a pattern. Complete darkness, sudden and absolute, the hum of the fluorescence cutting out like someone had thrown a switch. I stood frozen, flashlight gripped in my sweating palm, heart hammering against my ribs. Then, one by one, the lights came back on, but not all of them. Only certain fixtures scattered across the ceiling in what looked like random placement until I stepped back and saw it from a distance. They'd arranged themselves into a shape, an arrow, pointing deeper into the east wing, toward the storage area where the old stamping presses sat in shadows. I followed the arrow. What else could I do? I'd started this conversation. It seemed wrong to walk away now. The lights led me to press 7. I knew the number because it was stamped into the housing, faded but still legible after 6 decades. The machine was massive, easily 15 feet tall, a hulking mass of steel and hydraulics that had probably been cutting-edge technology in its day. Now it just looked like a monument to industrial obsolescence, outdated, forgotten, left to rust in a corner no one visited. The lights above press 7 flickered, a different pattern this time, faster, more urgent. HELPME. I stared at the machine, at the shadows pooling in its mechanisms, at the space where a man had died 60 years ago. Help you how? I wanted to ask. You're dead. What help could I possibly give? The lights flickered again. TRAPPED. Trapped where? I asked out loud, feeling insane for talking to a lighting fixture. In the machine? In the building? A long pause. Then, INBETWEEN. I didn't know what that meant. Didn't want to know. But I'd come this far, and some part of me, the part that had noticed the pattern in the first place, the part that couldn't let mysteries stay unsolved, wouldn't let me leave without understanding. What do you need? I asked. What can I do? The response came slowly, each letter deliberate. FINDME. The lights went out again, all of them, even my flashlight, which shouldn't have been possible because it was battery-powered and I'd just replaced the batteries that morning. I stood in perfect darkness, the smell of old oil and metal thick in my nostrils, and felt something brush past me. Not a touch exactly, more like a displacement of air, a pressure against my skin, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. But I didn't imagine the cold that followed, a wave of it rolling through the space like fog, dropping the temperature 20 degrees in seconds. Then the lights came back on and I was alone. I called in sick for the next 2 days. Couldn't face going back. Couldn't stop thinking about that darkness, that cold. The words spelled out in flickering light. FINDME. What was I supposed to find? His body? His memory? Some piece of him that had gotten trapped in the machine when he died. I went back to the library, dug deeper into Thomas Bellamy, looking for anything that might explain what he wanted. He'd been a recent hire at the time of his death. Only worked at Ridgeway for 3 months before the accident. Unmarried, no children, no family in the area. He'd moved here from somewhere out of state, taken the factory job because it was the only work available. A drifter, essentially, someone without roots, without connections, the kind of person who could disappear and barely leave a ripple. The accident report was harder to find. Took me 2 days and a bribe to a clerk at the county records office, but eventually I got a copy. The official cause was operator error. Bellamy had allegedly reached into the press while it was still cycling, trying to clear a jammed part. The safety mechanisms had failed, the press had come down, and by the time anyone realized what had happened, it was too late. But there were inconsistencies. Notes from witnesses who said Bellamy hadn't been anywhere near the press when it activated. A mechanic who'd inspected the machine afterward and found the safety locks had been manually overridden. A foreman who'd refused to sign the final report and had been quietly let go 3 weeks later. Someone had tampered with the machine. Someone had made sure Thomas Bellamy was in exactly the wrong place when those safety mechanisms failed. I thought about the lights, about the patterns, the messages, the plea for help. Thomas Bellamy hadn't just died in that factory. He'd been murdered. And he'd spent 60 years trying to tell someone. I went back to work that night with the accident report folded in my pocket. During my break, I returned to the East Wing, to Press 7, to the space where a drifter with no family had been killed and forgotten. I found the report, I said to the empty room. I know what happened. Someone sabotaged the machine. Someone killed you. The lights flickered. Y-E-S. Who? Who did it? A pause. Longer than before, like he was gathering strength for something difficult. R-A-Y. I stared at the lights, the name hanging in the air between us. Ray. Ray Chen, the floor supervisor who'd been at Ridgeway for 31 years, who'd dismissed my questions about the flickering lights, who'd known exactly what the pattern meant and had told me not to worry about it. Ray would have been young in 1962, just starting out. A new hire, maybe, around the same time as Thomas Bellamy. Ray killed you? I asked. Why? The response came faster now, urgent. A-S-K-H-I-M. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy work boots on concrete approaching from the main floor. Marcus? Ray's voice echoed through the empty wing. What are you doing back here? I turned around. He was standing at the entrance to the East Wing, silhouetted against the brighter lights of the active production floor. I couldn't see his face clearly, couldn't read his expression, but I could see his hands, and I could see the wrench he was carrying, gripped loosely at his side, not quite raised, but not quite relaxed either. The lights above us flickered once, a single pulse, like a warning, or maybe like a countdown. Just checking on some supplies, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too casual, too forced. Inventory said we were low on lubricant for the Line 3 bearings. Ray didn't move, stayed silhouetted in the doorway, wrench still hanging at his side. Lubricants in the west storage cage. You know that. Right. Must have gotten turned around. In a building you've worked in for 6 months. He took a step forward, and now I could see his face. The expression there wasn't angry. It was something worse, calculating, evaluating, like he was running numbers in his head, trying to figure out how much I knew. You've been spending a lot of time back here lately. People are starting to notice. People? Or just you? The question hung in the air. I watched his grip tighten on the wrench, watched his jaw clench almost imperceptibly. Above us, the lights flickered. Just once, just enough to make him glance up. The wiring in this section is shot, Ray said. Has been for years. I've told management 100 times, but they don't want to spend the money. He looked back at me, and something in his eyes had hardened. It plays tricks on you if you spend too much time here. Makes you see patterns that aren't there. Makes you think things that don't make sense. Things like what? Like whatever you've been writing in that notebook you carry around. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, I've noticed. Scribbling away during your breaks, counting the lights, timing the flickers. You're not the first person to get obsessed with this place. The East Wing does something to people. Did it do something to Thomas Bellamy? The name landed like a physical blow. Ray's whole body went rigid, the wrench rising slightly before he caught himself. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the distant hum of machinery from the active production floor, that constant industrial heartbeat that never stopped. Where did you hear that name? Ray asked. His voice was different now, quieter, dangerous. County records, library archives, amazing what you can find if you look hard enough. I was backing up slowly, putting distance between us, trying to keep my movements casual. He died in 1962, right here in Press 7. Accident report said operator error, but that's not really what happened, is it? You don't know what you're talking about. Safety locks were overridden. Witnesses said he wasn't even near the machine when it cycled. Someone set him up, Ray. Someone made sure he'd be in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Shut up. The wrench was fully raised now, gripped in both hands. You don't know anything. You're a kid who's been here 6 months, reading old newspapers and making up stories. Then why are you so scared? He moved faster than I expected. 63 years old, and he closed the distance between us in seconds, wrench swinging in an arc aimed at my head. I ducked, felt the metal whistle pass my ear, and scrambled backward until I hit the housing of Press 7. The lights went out. Not a flicker this time, complete darkness, instant and total, the same suffocating blackness I'd experienced before. I heard Ray curse, heard him stumbling in the dark, and I used the sound to orient myself. Moved sideways, keeping my hand on the cold metal of the press, trying to circle around toward the exit. You think the lights are going to save you? Ray's voice came from somewhere to my left, closer than I expected. I've been dealing with this shit for 30 years, ever since I figured out what the flickering meant. You think you're special? You're just another idiot who noticed too much. I kept moving, didn't respond, didn't give him anything to track. The darkness was absolute, the kind that makes you doubt your own existence, but I could feel the press beside me, could use it as a guide. Tom Bellamy was a thief, Ray continued. His voice was moving too, circling, hunting. Did your research tell you that? He was skimming from the company, pocketing parts, selling them out the back door. I caught him, reported it to management, and they told me to handle it. Handle it how? Quietly, a bitter laugh. They didn't want the publicity, didn't want people knowing that security was lax enough for some drifter to rob them blind. So I handled it, made it look like an accident. Clean, efficient, nobody asking questions. You murdered him. I did what I was told. The words echoed through the empty wing, bouncing off metal and concrete. I was 22 years old, 6 months into my first real job, and my boss told me to make a problem disappear. What was I supposed to do? Say no? End up like Tom, chewed up by a machine with nobody to mourn me. The lights flickered. Just for a second, just enough to show me where Ray was. 10 feet away, wrench raised, facing the wrong direction. Then darkness again. He's been haunting this place ever since, Ray said. His voice was shakier now, flickering his messages, trying to get someone to listen. I've watched a dozen workers notice the pattern over the years. Most of them quit before they figured it out. The ones who didn't. He trailed off. What happened to them? Accidents. This is a factory. Accidents happen. The cold returned. That same rolling wave I'd felt before, moving through the darkness like a living thing. I felt it pass me, felt the temperature drop around me, and then I heard Ray scream. The lights came back on. Ray was on the ground, wrench skittering away across the concrete, his hands clutching at his chest. For a moment, I thought he was having a heart attack. Then, I saw the frost. Spreading across his shirt, his arms, his face, a thin layer of ice crystallizing on his skin, crackling as he moved. And standing over him, barely visible, more suggestion than substance, was a shape. Man-sized, man-shaped, flickering in and out like a bad signal. I couldn't see features, couldn't see a face, just an outline, a presence, a thing made of cold and fury and 60 years of waiting. "Tom," Ray gasped. "Tom, please. I didn't have a choice. They made me do it." The shape didn't respond, just stood there, flickering, while the frost spread and Ray's breath came in shorter and shorter gasps. I should have run, should have used the distraction to escape, to get out of the east wing and call for help. Instead, I stood frozen, watching a dead man take revenge on his killer, watching justice delivered 60 years too late. Then the shape turned, looked at me, or at least oriented itself in my direction, that faceless presence focusing on me with an attention I could feel in my bones. The lights flickered once, a single pulse, the same gentle acknowledgement I'd received before. And I understood. He wasn't asking me to run. He was asking me to watch, to be a witness to what happened next. I didn't move, couldn't move, even if I'd wanted to. The cold radiating from Bellamy's shape had spread through the air, turning my breath to fog, making my joints stiff and sluggish. I watched as the frost continued to spread across Ray's body, watched as his struggles grew weaker, watched as the shape that had been Thomas Bellamy leaned closer to the man who had killed him. "Please." Ray's voice was barely a whisper now, his lips blue, ice crystals forming in his eyebrows. "I have a family, grandchildren. Please." The shape flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw something like hesitation, a pause in the relentless cold, a wavering in that concentrated presence. Thomas Bellamy had been alone when he died. No family, no one to mourn him. He knew what Ray was about to lose because he'd never had it in the first place. The lights overhead spelled out a message, slow and deliberate, SODIDI. So did I. Thomas Bellamy had a life too once, hopes, plans, a future that was stolen from him in the grinding teeth of Press 7. Whatever he might have become, whatever family he might have built, Ray had taken all of it, and for 60 years he'd lived with that theft, comfortable and unpunished, while Bellamy's ghost flickered in the lights, waiting for someone to listen. "I'm sorry," Ray gasped. "I'm sorry, Tom. I've been sorry every day for 60 years. The shape went still. The cold stopped spreading, though it didn't recede. Bellamy stood over his killer, that faceless presence radiating something I couldn't name. Not forgiveness, but not pure vengeance either. Something more complicated. Something that had been building for 6 decades in the space between life and death. The lights flickered again. SORRYISNTENOUGH. Then BUT. A pause. The shape turned toward me again, that attention I could feel in my bones. WITNESS. I understood. He wasn't just asking me to watch. He was asking me to remember, to carry what happened here out into the world, to make sure the truth didn't die in this abandoned wing the way he had, to be the thing he'd never had, someone who knew, someone who cared, someone who would ensure that Thomas Bellamy's story didn't end in silence. "I'll tell them," I said. My voice came out hoarse, barely audible. "Everything, the accident report, what really happened, all of it, I promise." The shape flickered once, that same gentle acknowledgement, and then began to change. The presence that had been concentrated into a man-sized form started to spread, to diffuse, cold air flowing outward like water released from a dam. The frost on Ray's body stopped growing, began to melt, dripping onto the concrete floor in tiny rivulets. Ray gasped, sucking in air, his whole body shaking. He was alive. Bellamy had chosen to let him live. But the ghost wasn't done. The lights overhead blazed to life, not flickering, not patterned. Just pure white light flooding the east wing brighter than I'd ever seen it. In that brilliance, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Scratches on the housing of Press 7 near the base. Not random marks, letters carved into the metal by something sharp. Names and dates, barely visible after decades of grime and neglect. I moved closer, crouching to read them. James Whitfield, 1978. Maria Santos, 1985. David Chen, 1991. Peter Kowalski, 2003. Lisa Morrison, 2011. 5 names, 5 dates, 5 people who, according to Ray, had accidents after noticing too much about the East Wing. "Ray." My voice was steady now, cold in a different way than the ghost's presence. "How many people did you kill to keep this secret?" He didn't answer, just lay on the concrete, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming from the corners of his eyes. Not from remorse, I realized, from relief. He'd expected to die tonight, and he hadn't, and that was all he cared about. The lights flickered one last time, a message, longer than any before. "They are here too. They are here too." The others, the 5 whose names were carved into the press, they were still in this building, still trapped in the space between, the way Bellamy had been, waiting for someone to notice, to listen, to bear witness to what had been done to them. I looked at the names again. Maria Santos, David Chen, Ray's last name. I remembered what he'd said. I was 22 years old, 6 months into my first real job. He'd been Ray Chen in 1962, just starting out. David Chen had died in 1991. David Chen, I said. Was he related to you? Ray made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. My son, my boy, he got a job here after college, wanted to follow in his old man's footsteps. And then he started asking questions, started noticing the lights. You killed your own son? It was an accident. The words came out flat, rehearsed. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The safety mechanisms failed, just like Tom, just like all of them. I thought I was going to be sick. 5 people dead because they'd noticed the truth. One of them Ray's own child, killed to protect a secret that had already claimed too many lives. The scope of it was staggering. Not just one murder, but 6, stretching across decades, all hidden behind the convenient excuse of industrial accidents. Why? I asked. Why keep killing? Bellamy was dead. The original crime was covered up. Why couldn't you just let it go? Because he wouldn't let me. Ray pushed himself up to a sitting position, his movements slow and painful. Every time someone noticed the lights, he'd start talking to them, spelling out his messages, trying to get them to dig. And once they knew, once they had the truth, they were a threat. To me, to the company, to everything I'd built. I did what I had to do. For 30 years, for survival. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something like clarity in his eyes. You think I wanted this? I was a kid when it started. A scared kid who made one terrible choice and spent his whole life trying to bury it. Every death was another shovel of dirt, another layer between me and what I'd done. And now? He laughed again, that same broken sound. Now you know. Now you're a witness, like Tom wanted. So what happens next? He spread his arms, a gesture of surrender. Are you going to kill me too? Join the list of people who couldn't handle the truth about this place. I looked at the names carved into the press. At Ray, slumped on the concrete floor, an old man who'd spent 60 years becoming a monster. At the lights overhead, still blazing, illuminating everything. No, I said. I'm not going to kill you. I pulled out my phone. The recording app had been running since I'd entered the East Wing, a habit I'd developed after the second time the lights spelled out messages, a way to document evidence I knew no one would believe otherwise. I'm going to let the police do that. Ray's face went white, whiter than it had been when the ghost was pressing cold into his bones. He lunged for me, but his frost-stiffened muscles wouldn't cooperate, and he collapsed back onto the concrete before he'd made it 2 feet. I backed toward the exit, phone in hand, watching him struggle to rise. The lights flickered above us. Not a message this time, just a gentle pulse, an acknowledgement, a thank you. Tom, I said to the empty air, I'll make sure they know. All of them. Every name. One more flicker. Then the lights steadied, and for the first time since I'd started working at Ridgeway Manufacturing, the East Wing felt like just another part of an old factory. Whatever had been trapped there was finally starting to let go. The police arrived 20 minutes later. I'd called them from the parking lot, standing in the cold November air, watching the factory windows and waiting for something to happen. Ray didn't try to escape. When the officers found him, he was still sitting on the floor of the East Wing, staring at the names carved into Press 7, mumbling confessions to crimes that had been closed as accidents decades ago. The recording on my phone was 47 minutes long, every word of Ray's confession clear as day. The detectives who listened to it kept exchanging looks, kept pausing the playback to write notes, kept asking me to repeat details they couldn't quite believe. 6 murders, 60 years, 1 factory, 1 secret, and an old man who'd buried bodies in paperwork and official reports. They arrested Ray that night, charged him initially with attempted assault, the wrench, the threats, but as the investigation expanded, more charges followed. The bodies of the original victims were long since buried or cremated, but there were records, inconsistencies in accident reports going back decades, witnesses who'd noticed things at the time but hadn't known what they were seeing, a pattern that, once you knew to look for it, became impossible to ignore. The trial took 8 months. I testified 3 times about the lights, about Ray's confession, about the names on the press. The defense tried to paint me as an unreliable witness, someone who'd been working overnight shifts and was prone to seeing things that weren't there. They couldn't explain the recording. They couldn't explain the 5 sets of initials carved into Press 7's housing, each one matching a worker who died in documented accidents over the past 40 years. Ray was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder. They couldn't prove the earlier deaths, Thomas Bellamy and James Whitfield, beyond reasonable doubt, the evidence too old and too compromised. But Maria Santos, David Chen, Peter Kowalski, and Lisa Morrison got their justice. 52 years to life, no possibility of parole. He'll die in prison, surrounded by walls instead of the factory floor where he'd spent his whole life hiding what he'd done. I quit Ridgeway the day after Ray's arrest. Couldn't go back into that building, couldn't walk past the East Wing knowing what had happened there. The company offered me a settlement to keep quiet about the details, generous, enough to pay off my student loans and then some. But I turned it down. I'd promised to be a witness. Witnesses don't take hush money. The story made local news for a few weeks. Factory of Horrors, one headline called it. 6 decades of murder hidden in plain sight. There were interviews with family members of the victims, tearful testimonies about loved ones who died in what everyone had been told were tragic accidents. Maria Santos's daughter, now in her 50s, talked about how her mother had mentioned strange lights in the days before her death. Peter Kowalski's brother said Peter had called him the night before his accident, sounding scared, saying he'd found something wrong at work. They'd all noticed. They'd all been silenced. And for decades, no one had listened. I went back to the factory once, after the trial. The building had been shut down pending a full safety investigation, the kind of bureaucratic response that comes too late to help anyone. Yellow tape across the entrances, warning signs posted on every door. I ducked under the tape and went in anyway. I needed to see the East Wing one more time. The lights were off. Emergency power only. Dim red exit signs casting everything in a hellish glow. But as I walked toward Press 7, the overhead fluorescents flickered to life. Not all of them, just enough to light my path. Just enough to guide me to the spot where Thomas Bellamy had died 62 years ago. I stood in front of the press, looked at the names carved into its housing, now documented and photographed and entered into evidence. Looked at the shadows pooling in the machinery, at the space where a man had spent hours trapped and dying, calling for help that never came. "They know now," I said to the empty room. "Everyone knows. It's over." The lights flickered once. That same gentle pulse I'd come to recognize. Acknowledgement, gratitude, peace. Then they flickered again, spelling out one final message. F-R-E-E. The word hung in the air for a moment. Then the lights steadied, brightened, and the oppressive weight that had always hung over the East Wing, that sense of something waiting, something watching, something trapped between one moment and the next, lifted. I felt it go, like pressure releasing from my ears, like stepping out of a room I hadn't realized was suffocating me. Thomas Bellamy was free, and so were the others. Maria, David, Peter, Lisa, James. All of them, finally released from the space between where they'd been trapped by violent deaths and buried truths. Free to go wherever it is that spirits go when they're no longer anchored to the places where they died. I left the factory and didn't look back. Drove home in the gray morning light, made coffee, sat on my couch, staring at nothing. The story was over, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed. Not just in that factory, but in me. I'd always believed that the dead stayed dead, that whatever happened after, heaven, oblivion, recycled atoms in an indifferent universe, it didn't reach back into the world of the living. But Thomas Bellamy had reached back, had spent 60 years flickering messages in factory lights, waiting for someone patient enough to notice, brave enough to listen, willing enough to act. What else was out there, trapped in the spaces we couldn't see? How many other ghosts were flickering their stories in patterns no one had learned to read? I think about that sometimes, when lights flicker unexpectedly, when old buildings creak in ways that sound almost like voices, when I notice something out of the corner of my eye that disappears when I look directly at it. I wonder what's trying to communicate. What truth is waiting to be uncovered? What witness is being called? I work at a different factory now. Day shift, newer building, no mysterious abandoned wings or decommissioned machinery gathering dust and shadows. It's boring, which is exactly what I wanted. Boring is safe. Boring doesn't leave names carved into equipment housings. Boring doesn't flicker messages in code that takes weeks to decipher. But sometimes, late in the afternoon when the sun hits the windows at just the right angle, I see the lights pulse. 3 short, 1 long. 3 short. The same pattern that started everything, that first caught my attention in a factory I'll never set foot in again. I know it's just electrical fluctuation, old wiring, power surges, the kind of thing that happens in any building with an aging infrastructure. That's what the rational part of my brain says anyway. But another part, the part that spent weeks talking to a dead man through fluorescent lights, wonders if someone else is trying to reach me. Someone trapped, someone forgotten, someone waiting for a witness who knows how to listen. I haven't answered yet, haven't pulled out a notebook, haven't started counting pulses, haven't let myself get drawn into another 60-year-old mystery that could end with me running from a killer in an abandoned wing. But I watch. I always watch now, because Thomas Bellamy taught me something important. The dead don't always stay silent. Sometimes they flicker. Sometimes they reach out. Sometimes they wait, patient as old machinery, for someone willing to notice the pattern in the noise. And when they do, when you're the one who finally hears them, you have a choice. Walk away and let the silence continue. Or step forward, start listening, and become the witness they've been waiting for. I chose to listen once. I might choose again. That's the thing about patterns. Once you learn to see them, you can't unsee them. And once you've been a witness, you're never really free. Story 5. The knock that came from inside the wall. The first knock came 3 days after I moved in. I was unpacking boxes in the living room, surrounded by newspaper-wrapped dishes and books I hadn't read in years when I heard it. A single knock, sharp and deliberate, coming from the wall behind the couch. Not a settling sound, not pipes clanking, not the random creaks of an old house adjusting to a new occupant. A knock. The kind you make with your knuckles when you want someone to open a door. I stopped unwrapping a coffee mug and stared at the wall. Pale yellow paint, slightly faded, with a hairline crack running from the baseboard to about knee height. The house was old, built in 1923 according to the listing, and old houses made sounds. I knew that. I'd prepared myself for it when I'd signed the papers on this drafty Victorian money pit that was going to consume my savings and my sanity, but was also, finally, mine. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. Okay, I said out loud, because talking to yourself is normal when you live alone, and I was going to live alone now whether I liked it or not. Just the house being weird. That's fine. We can work with weird. I went back to unpacking. Forgot about the knock almost immediately, buried it under the 1,000 other concerns of moving into a new place. Where to put the silverware, how to work the ancient thermostat, why the previous owners had painted the bathroom that particular shade of mustard yellow. The second knock came that night. I was in bed, almost asleep, hovering in that twilight space between consciousness and dreams. The knock was louder this time, more insistent. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced, coming from the wall directly behind my headboard. I sat up, heart racing. The bedroom was dark except for the streetlight filtering through the curtains, casting long shadows across the boxes I hadn't finished unpacking. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm, same wall, like someone was standing on the other side trying to get my attention. But there was no other side. That wall was exterior, nothing behind it but insulation and siding and the narrow alley that separated my house from the neighbors. I'd checked during the inspection. The wall was solid. I got out of bed, turned on every light between the bedroom and the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea I didn't want. Sat at my new old kitchen table in my new old house and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Hypnagogic hallucinations, that's what they called it when you heard things on the edge of sleep. Completely normal. Nothing to worry about. I didn't go back to the bedroom. Slept on the couch with the TV on, infomercials playing at low volume until dawn. The third knock came the next afternoon, which made the hypnagogic theory a lot harder to sell. I was fully awake, stone cold sober, standing in the kitchen making a sandwich. The knock came from the wall between the kitchen and what the listing had optimistically called a bonus room, a cramped space at the back of the house that I'd been using for storage. 3 knocks, same rhythm as before. I put down the butter knife and walked to the wall, pressed my ear against it, feeling faintly ridiculous, like a character in a movie doing exactly the wrong thing. For a long moment, nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, my own breathing. Then, so quiet, I almost missed it. A voice. Not words I could understand. More like a murmur. A vibration felt as much as heard, coming from somewhere deep inside the wall. A voice that rose and fell in cadences that might have been speech, might have been sobbing, might have been nothing at all. I jerked back from the wall like it had burned me. Stood in the middle of my kitchen, hands shaking, trying to process what I'd just heard, what I thought I'd heard, what I desperately wanted to believe I'd imagined. The rational part of my brain kicked in. Pipes could carry sound over long distances. The house shared walls with the neighbors on one side. Maybe someone was talking in the adjacent room, and the sound was traveling through some acoustic quirk of the old construction. Maybe there was a radio left on somewhere, or a TV, or any of 1,000 explanations that didn't involve voices coming from inside my walls. I went outside, walked around the house, checking the exterior, looking for anything that might explain what I'd heard. The wall behind the kitchen was exterior, facing the backyard. No neighbors on that side, just a fence and an overgrown garden that the previous owners had let go to seed. The wall behind my bedroom, where the first knocks had come from, was also exterior. Nothing but siding and the narrow alley and Mrs. Patterson's house next door. I could see her kitchen window from where I stood, could see her moving around inside, making dinner. I almost went to ask her, almost knocked on her door and said something insane like, "Have you been knocking on my wall at 3 a.m.? But I'd only met her once during the move-in, and she'd seemed nice enough, but also very old and very frail, and probably not the type to be knocking on walls in the middle of the night. I went back inside, made myself finish the sandwich I'd abandoned, ate it standing at the counter, watching the wall like it might do something. It didn't. The rest of the day passed in silence, and by evening I'd almost convinced myself that the whole thing was stress and exhaustion and the natural paranoia of living alone for the first time in 8 years. Then I found the door. I'd been meaning to clear out the bonus room, to turn it into something usable, a home office maybe, or a reading nook. That evening, I finally started moving boxes around, trying to figure out how much space I actually had to work with. The room was smaller than I'd remembered from the showing, smaller than it should have been actually, based on the exterior dimensions of the house. I'd noticed it during the inspection, had asked about it, and the inspector had shrugged and said something about old houses having odd layouts, nothing to worry about. But now, standing in the cramped space with boxes stacked around me, I saw what he'd missed. The back wall was wrong, not dramatically wrong. You wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. But the baseboard along the bottom didn't quite match the baseboard in the rest of the room. The paint was slightly different. Same color, but fresher, less faded. And in the corner, almost invisible unless the light caught it just right, was a seam. a vertical line running from floor to ceiling, as if someone had cut into the wall and then plastered over the gap. I got a flashlight and examined the scene more closely, pressed on the wall around it, feeling for give, for hollowness. The area to the left of the seam felt solid, normal. The area to the right felt different, thinner somehow, like there was empty space behind it. I found a hammer in one of the boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. Stood there for a long moment, weighing it in my hand, telling myself this was insane. I'd just bought this house. I couldn't start smashing holes in the walls on the third day. But the knocking had come from inside the wall. And the voice, that murmur, that vibration, had been real. I was sure of it now. Something was behind this wall, something that had been sealed up and forgotten, and it was trying to get my attention. I raised the hammer. Before I could swing, 3 knocks came from the other side, right where I was standing, right where my hand was pressed against the plaster. And then, clear as day, a voice. "Please, let me out." I dropped the hammer. It hit the floor with a thud that seemed impossibly loud in the silence that followed. I backed away from the wall, from the scene, from the voice that had spoken words I couldn't explain. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, my temples, the tips of my fingers. "Hello?" I whispered. Then, louder. "Is someone there?" Silence. The house settled around me, that creaking, groaning sound old buildings make, but nothing from the wall, nothing human, nothing deliberate. I left the bonus room, closed the door behind me like that would make a difference, sat in my kitchen with my phone in my hand, trying to decide who to call. The police? And say what? There's a voice in my wall asking to be let out. They'd think I was insane, or worse, wasting their time. A friend? I didn't have many of those left. The divorce had divided our social circle neatly down the middle, and most of the people I'd thought were mine had turned out to be his. The few who remained lived hours away, too far to help, too removed from my new life to understand. I could call Kevin. My ex-husband would probably answer, would probably even drive out if I sounded scared enough. But calling Kevin meant admitting I couldn't handle this alone, and I'd spent the last 8 months proving, to him, to myself, to everyone, that I could. In the end, I called no one. Made dinner I couldn't eat. Watched TV I couldn't focus on. Went to bed in the living room again because I couldn't face the bedroom with its exterior wall and its impossible knocking. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow looked like something moving. And underneath it all, that voice echoing in my memory, "Please, let me out." The next morning I went to the library. The house had a history. That's what the realtor had said, with the practiced enthusiasm of someone trying to make old sound like charming. Built in 1923 by a family named Aldridge. Passed through several owners over the decades. Minor renovations in the 60s, major ones in the 80s. Nothing remarkable in the listing. Nothing that would explain a sealed room or a voice begging for release. The library's local history section was tucked in a back corner, staffed by a woman named Dorothy, who looked like she'd been cataloging records since the building itself was new. I told her I'd just bought the old Aldridge house and was curious about its history. Her face did something complicated. Surprise, then concern, then a careful neutrality that told me she knew something she wasn't sure she should share. "The Aldridge house," she repeated. "On Maple Street?" "That's the one." "And you're living there now? Alone?" The question sent a chill down my spine. "Yes." "Why?" Dorothy didn't answer directly, just turned to her computer, typed something I couldn't see, and pointed me toward a shelf of local newspapers on microfiche. 1952, she said. "March. You'll want to start there." I found the article on the third reel. It was small, tucked into the back pages between an advertisement for vacuum cleaners and a notice about a church bake sale. Local woman reported missing. Helen Aldridge, age 34, had disappeared from her home on Maple Street. Her husband, Robert, had reported her missing after returning from a business trip to find the house empty. Police had searched, but found no evidence of foul play. The case remained open. I scrolled forward, looking for follow-up articles. Found one a week later, police still searching, no leads, and then nothing. Helen Aldridge had vanished without a trace, and the story had simply stopped. Buried under newer news, forgotten by everyone except the microfiche archives. I went back to Dorothy's desk. What happened to her? Helen Aldridge? No one knows for certain. Dorothy's voice was carefully neutral. She was never found. Robert Aldridge sold the house a few years later and moved away. There were rumors, of course. There always are in a case like that. What kind of rumors? She hesitated. Some people thought he'd done something to her, hidden the body somewhere the police couldn't find it. But nothing was ever proven, and Robert had an alibi for the trip. He couldn't have been involved. She paused again, something flickering in her eyes. The house has had trouble keeping owners ever since. People move in, stay a few months, move out. The previous owners lasted longer than most, almost 2 years, but even they left eventually. Did they say why? The wife mentioned hearing things, sounds on the walls. She thought it was animals at first, then plumbing problems. Had 3 different contractors come out, but none of them found anything. Dorothy looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Are you hearing things too? I didn't answer. Didn't know how to answer without sounding exactly as unhinged as I felt. I drove home with the weight of history pressing down on me. Helen Aldridge had disappeared in 1952. The bonus room, with its wrong dimensions and sealed seam, had probably been renovated around the same time, based on the age of the materials I'd seen. And now, 70 years later, someone was knocking from inside that wall, asking to be let out. The conclusion was obvious. Horrible, but obvious. I didn't go into the bonus room when I got home. Sat in the kitchen instead, staring at the wall, thinking about Helen Aldridge. 34 years old, same as me. Married, same as I had been. Living in this house, walking these halls, cooking in this kitchen. Had she stood where I was standing, looking at this same wall? Had she known what her husband was planning in those final moments before she disappeared? The knock came around sunset. 3 raps, same rhythm, same wall. I didn't flinch this time, just listened. Helen, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Is that you? A pause, then 2 knocks, quick and deliberate, something that might have been yes. Have you been here this whole time, since 1952? 2 knocks again. Oh God. I pressed my hand against the wall, against the plaster that separated me from whatever was on the other side. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. No one knew. A longer pause, then the voice again, clearer than before, coming from somewhere deeper than the physical wall should have allowed. He told them I left, told everyone I ran away, but I never left. I've been here the whole time, waiting for someone to listen. I'm listening now, I said. I'm here. Then let me out. The voice was urgent, desperate. Please, the wall is thin enough now. You can break through. You can find me. You can show them what he did. I looked at the hammer, still lying on the floor where I'd dropped it. Looked at the seam in the wall, at the fresh paint covering whatever was hidden beneath. Helen Aldridge had been waiting 70 years for someone to find her, for someone to tell her story, to give her remains a proper burial, to make sure the world knew she hadn't run away. How could I say no to that? I picked up the hammer, walked into the bonus room, raised it above my head, ready to swing. And then I heard another voice, fainter, coming from somewhere else in the house, somewhere upstairs, where I hadn't been since the knocking started. Don't. A single word, barely audible. A woman's voice, but different from the first one, older somehow, more tired. Don't let her out, please. Whatever you do, don't let her out. I froze. hammer raised, caught between two voices and two warnings, and a growing certainty that I didn't understand what was happening in this house at all. I lowered the hammer, slowly, carefully, like any sudden movement might tip the balance in a direction I couldn't control. "Who's there?" I called toward the ceiling, toward wherever that second voice had come from. "Who are you?" Silence from upstairs, but from the wall behind me, the first voice spoke again, urgent and insistent. "Don't listen to her. She's lying. She's been lying this whole time, keeping me trapped, making sure no one finds me. Please, you have to let me out." I backed out of the bonus room, keeping both directions in sight. The hallway stretched before me, stairs leading up to the second floor I'd barely explored since moving in. 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, a narrow space at the end of the hall that the listing had called an attic access. I'd been sleeping downstairs since the knocking started, avoiding the upper floors without really acknowledging why. "Hello?" I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, hammer still gripped in the other. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to understand what's happening." The second voice came again when I reached the landing, clearer now, emanating from the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, the one with the window that looked out over the backyard, the one I'd planned to use as a guest room if I ever had guests. "She's not what she says she is. Helen Aldridge died in 1952, that much is true, but what's trapped in that wall isn't Helen, not anymore." I approached the bedroom door. It was closed. I didn't remember closing it, but the house was old, and doors swung on their own sometimes. I pushed it open and found an empty room, dust motes swirling in the evening light from the window. "Where are you?" I asked. "Here." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm always here. I've been trying to warn people for decades, but no one listens. They hear the knocking first. The knocking is louder, more insistent. It drowns me out." "Who are you?" "My name is Margaret. Margaret Thorne. I lived in this house from 1968 to 1971. A pause, heavy with something I couldn't name. "I was the first one to hear the knocking, the first one Helen convinced to break through the wall." My blood went cold. "What happened?" "I let her out. What was left of her anyway. The thing that had been growing in there for 16 years, feeding on her rage and her grief and her need for revenge." The voice cracked, something like a sob breaking through. "It killed me, made it look like an accident. A fall down the stairs, a broken neck. And then it went back behind the wall to wait for the next person who would listen." From downstairs, I heard the knocking start again. Louder now, more insistent, a rapid-fire percussion that sounded less like someone asking for help and more like someone demanding entry. "She's angry," Margaret said. "She knows I'm talking to you. She knows I'm ruining her story." "I don't understand. If Helen died in 1952, how can she—" "What's behind that wall isn't Helen Aldridge. It's what Helen became after her husband sealed her in alive. 3 days she was in there, dying by inches, and all she had was her hatred, her fury. It transformed her into something else, something that doesn't want justice anymore. It just wants out." The knocking intensified. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, through the walls, the whole house shaking with the force of it. "Then why did her husband do it?" I demanded. "Why did Robert seal her in?" "Because he knew what she was becoming. He saw it happening, the change, the darkness growing inside her. He tried to stop it the only way he knew how." Margaret's voice was fading, growing thinner. "He wasn't a murderer. He was a man trying to contain something terrible, and he failed." The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, expectant, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then, from downstairs, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the floor of the bonus room, moving toward the stairs. "She's coming," Margaret whispered. "She doesn't need you to break through anymore. You've given her enough attention, enough belief. The wall is thin enough now. She can push through on her own." I ran, not toward the stairs, toward the window, toward escape, toward anything that wasn't the thing I could hear climbing toward me. The window was old, painted shut, and I slammed the hammer against it in desperation. Glass shattered outward, cold air rushing in, and I was halfway through the frame when I heard her voice behind me. "Where are you going, dear?" I turned. I couldn't help it. She was standing in the doorway, a woman, or something shaped like a woman. Pale skin stretched too tight over bones that seemed to shift beneath it. Dark hair that moved like it was underwater, drifting around a face that might have been beautiful once but was now something else entirely. And her eyes. God, her eyes. Hollow and hungry and filled with a rage that had been building for 70 years. "You were going to help me," Helen said. Her voice was different now, not pleading, not desperate, just cold. "You were going to set me free." "You're already free," I whispered. Margaret said the wall is thin enough now. "The wall keeps me anchored, keeps me tied to this place, to this house, to the bones of what I used to be." She took a step forward, and the floorboards groaned beneath her. "But if someone brings my body out, if someone takes me away from here and buries me somewhere else, then I can follow, then I can go anywhere." Behind her, in the hallway, I saw something else, fainter than Helen, barely visible. A woman in 1970s clothing, long skirt and peasant blouse, watching with an expression of desperate hope. Margaret, the one who'd tried to warn me, the one Helen had killed, and behind Margaret, others. Half a dozen shapes, some clearer than others, all of them watching. All of them women. All of them, I realized with dawning horror, people who had lived in this house and never left. "How many?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How many people have you killed?" Helen smiled. It was the most terrible thing I'd ever seen. "Enough to know how this goes. You'll break through the wall. You'll find my bones. And either you'll bury them somewhere far from here and let me loose on the world, or I'll add you to my collection. Those are your choices, dear." She gestured toward the shapes behind her. They all made the wrong one. "I'm hoping you'll be smarter." The hammer was still in my hand. The window was still open behind me. And somewhere inside this house was a wall with a secret behind it, a body that had been waiting 70 years to be moved. I looked at the shapes in the hallway, at Margaret, who had tried to save me, at the others, the unnamed victims who had heard the knocking and tried to help and died for their compassion. Helen wanted me to choose between becoming a murderer and becoming a ghost. But maybe there was a third option. "The bones anchor you here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "That's what you said. If they leave the house, you can follow them." Helen tilted her head, that underwater hair drifting around her face. "That's right. But if the bones stay, you're trapped. You can't leave this property. You can knock, you can manifest, you can kill anyone stupid enough to move in, but you can't actually go anywhere. Which is why you're going to help me." She took another step forward. "One way or another." I looked past her, at Margaret and the other shapes in the hallway, at the women who had tried to help and paid with their lives, who had been trapped here with their killer for decades. Margaret met my eyes, and I saw something there, not just desperation, understanding. "What happens if the bones are destroyed?" I asked. "Not moved, destroyed." Helen went still. For the first time since she'd manifested, something like uncertainty flickered across that terrible face. "They can't be destroyed. They're part of me. They're what keeps me anchored." "Right." I gripped the hammer tighter. "But anchors can be cut. Ties can be severed. If the bones burn, if there's nothing left to anchor you, you'll die." Helen's voice had changed, colder, more dangerous. "You'll burn with them. I won't let you leave this house alive." "Maybe, but you won't leave either." I looked at Margaret again. "None of you will. You'll all be stuck here forever, tied to a pile of ash instead of a pile of bones. "We're already stuck," Margaret said, her voice faint but clear. "She keeps us here, uses our energy to sustain herself. If the bones burn, if the anchor breaks." She looked at Helen with something like hope. "Maybe we all go free." Helen turned on her, that face twisting into something inhuman. "Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You're nothing. You're all nothing, just fuel for my..." I ran. Not toward the window this time. Toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the stairs. Helen screamed behind me, a sound that wasn't human, that shook the walls and made the lights flicker and die. But she was focused on Margaret, on the betrayal, and that gave me the seconds I needed to clear the doorway. The ghosts in the hallway parted for me. I felt them as I passed. Cold spots, pressure against my skin, whispered encouragements I could barely hear. They were helping. After all these years of being trapped, of being used, they were finally fighting back. I hit the stairs at a run, taking them 2 at a time, nearly falling when my foot caught on the loose board at the bottom. The bonus room was ahead of me, door still open, that seam in the wall visible in the dim light from the kitchen. Helen appeared at the top of the stairs, not walking, just there, one moment empty space, and the next filled with rage and cold and 70 years of accumulated hatred. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I've waited too long. I've killed too many. I will not be erased by some..." I didn't let her finish. I was already in the kitchen, already yanking open the cabinet under the sink, already grabbing the bottle of lighter fluid I'd bought for the backyard grill I'd never used. The matches were in the drawer by the stove. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the first 3 before one finally struck. Helen materialized in the kitchen doorway, close enough to touch, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating off her like winter through a broken window. "Don't," she said, and for just a moment she sounded almost human, almost like the woman she'd been before her husband sealed her in a wall and left her to die. "Please, I just want to be free. I just want to leave this place." "I know," I said, "but I can't let you." I threw the match. The lighter fluid caught immediately, flames spreading across the kitchen floor toward the bonus room, toward the wall with its hidden seam and its hidden bones. Helen screamed again, not in rage this time, but in something like terror. She lunged for me, those hollow eyes burning with fury, and I felt her hands close around my throat, cold. So cold it burned, so cold my vision started to go white at the edges. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare into the face of a woman who had been dying in pieces for 70 years and had finally almost escaped. Then something hit her. Not physical. There was nothing physical to hit, but something slammed into Helen from behind, knocked her sideways, broke her grip on my throat. I gasped, sucking in air that tasted like smoke, and saw Margaret standing there. Clearer than before, more solid, her face set with determination. "Go," Margaret said. "The fire will do the rest, but you have to get out." Behind her, the other ghosts were converging on Helen, holding her, restraining her, pouring whatever energy they had left into keeping her away from me. Helen thrashed and screamed, but there were too many of them. Too many women she'd killed, too many victims who had finally found a way to fight back. I ran for the front door. The smoke was thickening now, flames spreading through the old wooden structure faster than I'd expected. I could feel the heat on my back, could hear the walls cracking as the fire consumed them. The bonus room was fully engulfed by the time I reached the porch, orange light flickering through the windows, that sealed wall finally burning. I made it to the lawn before my legs gave out, sat in the grass, coughing, watching my new old house go up in flames. The neighbors were coming out now. Someone was calling 911. I could hear sirens in the distance. Normal sounds, normal reactions to an abnormal situation. In the upstairs window, I saw them. Margaret and the others, silhouettes against the flames. They weren't screaming, weren't burning, just standing there, watching me. And as I watched, They began to fade. Not into smoke, not into ash, just fading, dissolving, finally released from whatever had been holding them here. Margaret raised her hand. A small wave, barely visible through the smoke. "Thank you," she mouthed. Or maybe I imagined it. Maybe I just wanted to believe that what I'd done had meant something. Then she was gone. They were all gone. And in the heart of the fire, I heard one last scream, high and thin and furious, the sound of something that had waited 70 years to escape, finally realizing it never would. The sound of Helen Aldridge's rage consuming itself, burning away with the bones that had anchored her to this world. The roof collapsed. A shower of sparks erupted into the night sky, and the scream cut off, and the house that had been standing since 1923 was nothing but fire and ruin. I sat on the lawn and watched it burn. Watched my savings, my fresh start, my proof that I could make it on my own. All of it going up in smoke. I should have been devastated, should have been calculating losses and insurance claims and where I was going to live now. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Relief. The fire department arrived too late to save anything. They asked questions I couldn't really answer. Electrical fire, I said. Old wiring. I'd barely made it out. They wrapped me in a blanket and checked my throat, which was already bruising from Helen's grip, and told me I was lucky to be alive. They had no idea how lucky. I watched until the last embers died. Until there was nothing left of the house on Maple Street except ash and scorched foundation and the faint smell of smoke that would linger in my hair for days. Somewhere in that ash were the bones of Helen Aldridge, finally destroyed after 70 years of waiting. And somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't see or touch or understand, Margaret Thorne and the others were finally free. I'd lost everything. My house, my money, my plan for starting over. But I'd survived. And for the first time since the divorce, since Kevin, since all of it, that felt like enough. The insurance company ruled it accidental. Faulty wiring in an old house, exactly what I'd told them. They paid out enough to cover most of what I'd lost, which wasn't much. I'd only been there a week, hadn't accumulated the layers of possessions that accumulate when you stay somewhere long enough to call it home. I spent 2 weeks in a motel while I figured out what came next. Didn't sleep well. Kept waking up at 3 a.m., listening for knocking that never came. The bruises on my throat faded from purple to green to yellow, and eventually disappeared entirely. The memories didn't fade as fast. I went back to the library on my 3rd day in the motel. Dorothy was there, same desk, same careful expression when she saw me walk in. "I heard about the fire," she said. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be." I sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted. "You knew, didn't you, about the house, about what was in there?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk and pulled out a folder, thick with newspaper clippings and handwritten notes. "My grandmother was friends with Helen Aldridge," she said, before she disappeared. She always said Robert's story didn't make sense, that Helen would never have just left. She spent years trying to find out what really happened. Dorothy pushed the folder toward me. She never figured it out, but she documented everything. The people who moved in and moved out, the accidents that seemed too frequent, the rumors about sounds in the walls. I opened the folder. Newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. Handwritten notes in faded ink. A list of names with dates beside them. Owners of the house on Maple Street, going back to 1952. Some had moved away. Some had died. And some had simply disappeared. Their fates recorded with question marks and speculation. She knew something was wrong, Dorothy continued, but she could never prove it. And after she died, I kept the research, kept watching the house, kept hoping someone would figure out what she couldn't. "Why didn't you warn me before I bought it?" "Would you have believed me?" She smiled sadly. "A stranger telling you the house was haunted, that something terrible lived in the walls? You would have thought I was senile." Everyone does, when you try to tell them things they don't want to hear. She was right. I wouldn't have believed her. Wouldn't have believed anyone, not until I'd heard the knocking myself, felt the cold of Helen's hands around my throat, watched a house burn down around the bones of a woman who'd been dead for 70 years. What do you think happened to her? I asked. To the real Helen, I mean, before she became that. Dorothy considered the question. I think Robert Aldridge loved his wife. I think he saw something happening to her, something dark, something that was eating her from the inside. And he panicked. Did something terrible because he didn't know what else to do. She paused. My grandmother found his diary, years later, in an estate sale, of all places. He wrote about Helen changing, about the way she looked at him sometimes, like she was calculating something, about the things she said in her sleep. What kinds of things? Hungry things, angry things, things about wanting to hurt people, to take things from them, to make them suffer the way she was suffering. Dorothy's voice dropped. He didn't seal her in that wall out of cruelty. He did it because he was afraid of what she'd do if he didn't. I thought about Helen's face when she'd manifested, the hunger in those hollow eyes, the rage that had been building for 7 decades. Whatever Robert Aldridge had seen in his wife, it had terrified him enough to do something unforgivable. And maybe, just maybe, he'd been right to be terrified. The others, I said, the women she killed, Margaret Thorne and the rest. Do you know their names? Dorothy nodded slowly. Some of them. Margaret I knew about. She was a young mother, moved in with her husband and 2 children. The official story was that she fell down the stairs. The children found her. She looked down at the folder. The husband moved them out within a week. Couldn't stand to be in the house anymore. I always wondered if he knew the truth somehow, if Margaret had told him about the knocking before she died. I thought about Margaret's ghost, the way she'd thrown herself at Helen to give me time to escape, the way she'd waved goodbye as the house burned. She'd spent over 50 years trapped with the thing that had killed her, and she'd still found the strength to fight back. They're free now, I said, all of them. I saw them at the end, fading, going wherever it is that spirits go when they're not tied down anymore. I hope so. Dorothy's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. My grandmother would have liked that, knowing that Helen was finally stopped, that the others were finally at peace. I left the library with the folder under my arm. Dorothy had insisted I take it, said she'd been holding on to it long enough, and maybe the research belonged with someone who'd actually survived the house. I've read through it a dozen times since then, piecing together the history that led to that night, trying to understand the tragedy that had created something so monstrous. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is the part where I tell you I learned something, where I wrap up the story with a neat lesson about old houses and hidden horrors and the importance of listening to your instincts. But the truth is, I'm not sure I learned anything except that the world is stranger and more dangerous than I ever imagined, that there are things hiding in walls and basements and abandoned rooms, waiting for someone to hear them, and that not every voice calling for help deserves to be answered. I live in an apartment now, new construction, all glass and steel and modern wiring. No hidden rooms, no sealed walls, no history older than the 5 years since the building went up. It's bland and characterless, and I love it. Love the way the walls are exactly where they should be. Love the silence that fills the rooms at night. Love knowing that nothing is trapped inside waiting for me to set it free. Sometimes I still hear knocking, not from the walls, from my own head. Echoes of those 3 sharp raps that started everything. I wake up sweating, certain that I'm back in that house, certain that Helen is standing in my doorway with her hollow eyes and her underwater hair and her 70 years of rage. Then I remember. The fire, the screaming, the bones turning to ash, and the anchor finally breaking. She's gone. They're all gone. The house on Maple Street is nothing but a scorched foundation and a lot that will probably sit empty for years because no one wants to build on land with that kind of history. But I think about the other houses sometimes, the other old buildings with strange dimensions and sealed rooms and sounds that no one can explain. How many Helens are out there, waiting behind walls, knocking in patterns that mean help me, please, let me out. How many people hear those knocks and do exactly what I almost did? Break through, reach in, try to rescue something that doesn't want to be rescued so much as released. If you ever buy an old house, check the dimensions. Make sure the rooms are the size they should be. Look for seams in the walls, paint that doesn't quite match, baseboards that seem newer than the rest. And if you hear knocking, if something behind the wall asks you to let it out, think very carefully before you pick up that hammer. Some things are trapped for a reason, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again.